Good evening. Today is January 9th, 2014. Happy New Year to everybody out there. I'd like to call the Hyde Park Central School District Board of Education meeting to order at 5:36. And may I have a motion to enter executive session to discuss confidential matters pertaining to the future employment of a particular person or persons?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? All right, well, yeah. We're in executive session. You don't get it, discuss it. May I have a motion to return to general session, please?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? We're back in open session. At this time, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I believe we have no agenda modifications. May I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. Let me move my thing down a little bit. And now we have Pride. You gonna-
Yeah. One official sign. Get my notes.
While she's getting everything together, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody here and wish them all a Happy New Year. Everybody out there in TV land, Happy New Year. I hope it's a good year. We expect to be working very hard on a new budget, so it's going to be a tough year for us. But we all ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we haven't had a whole lot of events, but I did want to highlight that the newspaper did a very excellent coverage just prior to the break. Both North Park and Violet Avenue do winter workshops, and the Northern Dutchess News did a nice spread on the winter workshops, and it's a little bit of community involvement, volunteerism on the staff part, but the winter workshops, it's an excellent use of the time the day before a break, where normally it's hard to keep the kids focused, entertained, and in the olden days, it was a lot of movies and a lot of parties. And the winter workshops are engineering workshops, physical education workshops, karate, art, and the students get to choose 4 workshops, and they move throughout their day. And it's just one example of some of the very creative things that are being utilized to capture time that would otherwise have been lost and keep an educational, innovative, and creative focus. So, my compliments to all of our staff that are involved. I don't have an athletic update at this point because we've had such weather that everything's been rescheduled. We do have more concerts coming up. We start our concert season prior to the break, and it continues in through the month of January. So please check the calendars. We actually have a concert going on tonight at Haviland Middle School, and that was a reschedule. And so please check your calendars. We do have one official Pride to recognize tonight, and this is a great one because this is a repeat one, and not only is it a repeat, it's now multiplied even since we put it on the agenda. So I'm going to ask Margaret Robley to join me at the podium, to join Doug and I at the podium. Well, first I have to say that I'm a #1 fan of Margaret Robley and her program and everything that she brings not only to North Park Elementary but to the whole district. I'm a huge, as a former English teacher, physical education is still very near and dear to my heart because I think nobody wants to come sit in my English class unless they've really been able to release their energy and really learn about all the things that cooperation, collaboration, and all the things we want them to do in any classroom. And Margaret exemplifies physical education. You may remember that last year we brought Margaret here because she was named the New York State Physical Educator of the Year. And we honored her at that time. So we put her on the agenda this evening because prior to the break, I was notified that she got another recognition and another accolade. And I'm going to read this. The Southeastern Zone is proud to recognize Margaret Robley as their 2013 Amazing Person. Margaret received both her bachelor's degree and master's degree in physical education from SUNY Cortland. She has been an elementary educator and coach at North Park Elementary in the school in the Hyde Park district for the past 30 years. She has successfully written several grants securing equipment for classrooms based on increased activity time. She also secured financial support to cover the cost of a yoga instructor to introduce yoga to primary students. Margaret is an active member of New York State AFHERD, that's the Athletic Health Physical Education something.
Recreation and dance.
There you go, Recreation and Dance, and the Southeastern Zone. She is the elementary physical education section representative, and she consistently attends zone meetings. She volunteers on the zone's Student Physical Education Awards program, the annual boxball tournament, and she is the zone webmaster. She's also done a lot in that area for North Park. She has published articles in PE Central and on the PE for Links for You website. She is presented at the district, state, and zone levels, as well as at the elementary, middle school physical education section summer sizzlers. I can say that 3 times fast if you want. And juggle. No. Margaret was honored as the 2011 New York State AFHERD Elementary Physical Education Teacher of the Year. She received the North Park PTA Outstanding Service Award and a certificate of recognition from the Hyde Park Board of Education for dedication in leadership and professional development. It is with great pleasure that the Southeastern Zone recognizes Margaret Robley as their 2013 Amazing Person. So, after that. So that was why we put Margaret on the agenda, and I was notified sometime last week, I believe, or over the break, that as the New York State Physical Education Teacher of the Year award, she moved into the regional category. There are 6 regions throughout the country, and I don't have the official paperwork, but Margaret is now the recipient of the Eastern United States Physical Educator of the Year, and that now qualifies Margaret to be one of 6 for the nationals. And so I think it's in April. She will travel to the conference where they will announce one of the 6 as winners. Margaret, whether you're the winner or not, you are #1, not only here, but on the whole eastern coast of the United States. And we are so honored to have somebody of your caliber and everything you do in our district. So congratulations. Keep going. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other pride?
Yeah, I've got some pride here. My pride is with our music department. They gave my daughter the skills and the knowledge of music to be able to switch an instrument from French horn to the mellophone, joined the Michigan State Marching Band, and that got her to be able to march in the Rose Bowl. So thank you very much, Music Department. I'm very proud that this district can do that for kids, so keep it up.
Okay.
Being a music supporter, all right, I think that's great. So, we'll move on to Superintendent's Report, 6.1.
Yeah, I have two. Actually, I have one, and I'll turn the second one over to Aviva. I just wanted to announce that we did, as we've discussed in past board meetings, we did officially connect with a realtor to put Hyde Park Elementary School up for rent. We don't anticipate somebody coming and renting the whole building immediately, but it would be fiscally prudent for us to work with a professional to see if we could get a long-term tenant. The building is not for sale. The building is for rent. We certainly already have one department over there. We would not accept a tenant before July 1, so that if we needed to make adjustments for the people that we have over there, we could. So the sign went up, I believe, today. And there are already rumors that the building's for sale and we're selling it, and it's not for sale, it's for rent. Ideally, we don't really anticipate right now, there aren't a lot of people looking for a school building that's not air conditioned and doesn't have Wi-Fi. So we don't anticipate tenants breaking down our door. They certainly haven't for the last 2 years. Ideally, it'd be great if we could rent out the back half of the building, but we do have to keep our options open that we could find somebody who wanted to rent out the entire building. We are committed to keeping the elementary school in the possession of the district, but we would be remiss if we didn't seek a tenant. So the for sale sign went up. Sorry, that's why there's a rumor. The realtor sign went up, and it is for rent, not for sale. Speaking of Hyde Park Elementary, it is Aviva's Department, Pupil Services, that is in the front of the building. They've been doing a very hospitable job, going above and beyond, because they certainly are there just to operate their department. But as you know, we have a playground in the front of Hyde Park Elementary, and we have a lot of inquiries. And now we share the building, the front of the building. The Senior Citizen Center has a room at the north end of the building. We have Bright Days Bright Days Child Care, who operate in the building when school is closed, so Veterans Day, President's Day, over the winter break. They run a daycare for parents who work during those breaks. And the kitchen, we have people in the kitchen, Cognitive Cuisine. They are a company that puts together lunches for private schools, nursery schools, where they develop healthy lunches and deliver them. It is at a cost. They are a for-profit company. One of the partners is an educator, so they utilize the kitchen to prepare their meals and deliver them to to people who want that service. Aviva found another creative short-term use for having the public access that building that would provide a service to hopefully a great number of people in the community. And she managed to dovetail that with a collaboration with the existing tenant. So I'm going to turn it over to Aviva to explain what we're going to be doing in the healthcare industry.
Okay, thank you.
Health insurance.
So I'm sure that in the news recently, maybe, not so recently, but in the recent past, you've heard about difficulties people had signing up for healthcare in the Affordable Care Act. I ran into Linda Brady, who works for Maternal Infant Services Network, at a forum event. And she let me know that she's a healthcare navigator and that MISN has the contract to help people sign up for healthcare. And it's free and available to anyone in the county. So we talked about, that a lot of people don't necessarily know that. A lot of people don't have healthcare, have really struggled to sign up. So we arranged 4 dates, at least to start with, during the enrollment period, which is through March, at Hyde Park Elementary in one of the classrooms. So they'll bring the navigators, and then Cognitive Cuisine has offered free refreshments for people. And Bright Days Camp out of Regina Chile, that's the organization Dr. Rychek was talking about, they're going to do free childcare for people. So you still need to call Maternal Infant Services Network to make the appointment. They're an hour and a half long. They tell you what to bring, and they basically sit elbow to elbow with you and sign you up for healthcare if you don't have it. And so there will be flyers and press release and information, all the ways that we get that information out. So it's at no cost to the district, and we're giving this information to everyone within the Hyde Park School District. If you know people who don't live within Hyde Park School District, they can still call MISN and make an appointment. But we're just really getting the word out and taking this opportunity to make it really easy for people to get health care. So if anyone has questions, you can ask me, and you should be hearing more about this soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and next, we would like to take some time, and I'll invite Elliot up here as well as Wayne. As you know, like many places in the area, we have been experiencing some heating issues in the district, primarily at FDR and Haviland. FDR, the heating issues have been isolated valve breaks and incidents. We had an Arctic blast come through and a couple of malfunctions of our heating system that have been remedied and are being remedied and monitored. But our bigger heating issue is certainly at Haviland Middle School. And the major heating issue involves the heat to our A wing. And that is primarily the result of we have a new boiler system and we have old plumbing in order to have that heat travel. And I'll have Elliot talk about that. Additionally, we had a couple of other heating issues at Haviland Middle School. One in the 6th grade wing that turned out that a switch that wasn't turned on, so it took a couple of hours for the heat to come up in the 6th grade wing. We had a water pump break that affected the cafeteria. And at this point, I will invite Elliot up to talk about the heat in the A wing. What we have done in the meantime, come on up, Elliot. What we've done in the meantime, I've been working very closely with Eric Shaw, Elliot Garcia, Wayne Kurlander. It's been all hands on deck. It's been a difficult process. We're giving it 110%. We haven't remedied everything. We have had to relocate a number of classrooms so that we're taking people out of the areas where the heat is not up to par and relocate them. And so at this time, I am going to ask Elliot to just give us an overview of Haviland Heating.
Okay. Good evening. We've been pretty busy over the last couple of days trying to address the heat issues at Haviland Middle School, as many of you know. Excuse me, my voice is still coming back. Essentially, we called in a group of experts, a subcontractor, one of the contractors that worked on our major capital project, to review the infrastructure that carries the hot water that supplies heat to the A and B wings of Haviland Middle School. For those that are familiar with our recent capital work, we upgraded the boilers, which create the heat. We also replaced the main hot water feed line, supply and return, that brings the hot water to that section of the building from the main boiler room. However, the problems that we're experiencing now are the lines that come off of those replaced lines and go into our equipment. Again, we're dealing with pipes that are 100 years old in some parts of the building, or 75 years old. Historic issues of bad water, sediment, things that clog pipes the same way that people experience clogged arteries over time with bad things in your bloodstream. It is quite a similar phenomenon. And so over the last year, when we didn't have the hot water getting to that side of the building, not all of these things were apparent at the time. However, when we're able to supply that hot water now with the new systems that we have fixed, we pressurize these old pipes, and sometimes things get loose, get clogged, and the clogs that we have had, or the sluggish pipes that we have had, are becoming painfully obvious, especially in times of extreme cold as we've had in the last few days. So it has been challenging. The only benefit that I can share with the group is that we are identifying specific issues that can be addressed. It's not like we can't find a problem. We're finding numerous problems, and we're game planning a way to address them systematically that's both cost-effective and immediate to provide for our students and staff. So I've had experts in the building over the last couple of weeks in terms of HVAC engineers. Specifically, I've had mechanics in the building this morning tearing apart our systems, photographing, documenting exactly what they're finding, sharing that with me. I've been able to share that with Wayne and with Dr. Reichik. Excuse me. And as we collect this data, we're starting to formulate a plan for immediate correction. I will have experts in the building again tomorrow to continue this review process, and next Monday and Tuesday, the professional engineer from our architectural firm that designed our capital upgrades is coming in to review the impact of what we're experiencing and finding and how it relates to the capital work that's been done. So I'd say in the next 3 to 5 days, we hope to have a sharper, clearer picture of the current state of the Haviland heating system infrastructure and what we can do to repair it.
And I will add that on tonight's agenda, we put a resolution on to seek the board's approval to let us access our emergency repair reserve fund. One of the things we do know is, as we're discovering the problems and the immediacy of the need to get them fixed, we don't have enough in-house staff members to address it in a timely fashion. We'll know more about the cost and scope of the work once we have all the recommendations, but in order to be prepared to access our emergency reserve funds, we did add that as a resolution tonight.
Ellie, can I just ask one question?
Yes, sir.
When we had the work done, we went underground, under the floor in the cafeteria, and up over the ceiling. Is that all that new pipe is working? It's the stuff coming off it?
Yes, sir. We've been able to assess temperature from one end of the campus to the other, and I'm going to try to be as descriptive as possible without getting overcomplicated. Your hot water comes out of your basement boiler room in the C section, in the original section of the middle school. Mm-hmm. Now, part of our capital project has been not just to upgrade the boilers, but the pipes that come out of that boiler room under the ground into the A section cafeteria and up into the ceiling.
Right.
Now, at the very extreme other end of the building where those pipes are terminated, we do detect proper, appropriate temperature of what the water needs to be, which means we're not losing heat from the new boilers through the new pipes all the way to the extreme end of the building, which is great news because that means that our capital investments to this point have had a positive impact on the building. The issues that we're experiencing are after that point, as they branch off into the individual pieces of equipment, we're finding that there's blockages or other mechanical failures associated that weren't originally incorporated with the project.
Okay. Thank you.
Elliot, when you brought the specialist in, yesterday or the day before, whatever it may be, and one of the problems they found is sediment in the coils.
Yes, sir.
That's what I'm hearing. Why wasn't this detected when we put the new pipes in? And I'm sure through the project we did a startup system.
Yes, we did.
We ran it and we didn't see problems then.
Originally, when we started the system in the fall, we were doing pipe temperature checks, and we were getting that hot water temperature all the way to the coil. The return delta, sorry, not to be overly technical, the temperature differential from what goes into the coil to what comes out wasn't as noticeable because we weren't really making as much heat at the time. However, now we're noticing 60 to 70 degree drop off between what's going into the coil and what's supposed to be coming out, and that number should be closer to 20 or less in a standard system. So it's a lot more apparent in a colder environment to see those differences and what's not going through. Now we're actually taking everything apart and checking for flow and finding that plaque and sediment inside those pipes.
So that's, they're confident, you're confident, that's the problem.
I'm confident that that's a problem. I know that the pipes need to be, I know that the pipe flow is reduced because of the plaque and sediment. I'm relatively certain that attempting to clean these old pipes could do more harm than good, and it may be most logical to replace them. The extent of the linear feet of that replacement remains to be seen. We're trying to look into them in segments from both sides to see, is it 6 feet before and after the unit? Is it 12 feet before and after the unit? These are the kind of things that we're still looking into. I can't see into the coil, but
Right.
we're trying to be logical and say if we've got sediment on one end and the other end, it stands to reason that we probably have sediment inside the coils as well. And we're looking at the unit cost of the coils and trying to err on the side of caution here. We don't want to be, penny wise and dollar foolish. So that's kind of the way that we're coming at this whole thing. We're trying to look into the system physically, and one of those enough's enough. Take it apart and let's take a look at it and see what's inside, to get the best idea of exactly how much needs to be replaced.
Okay, my other concern was, why are we finding this out now when we had the problem before the holiday break? And why didn't we bring specialists in at that time to work
We-
over the holiday break?
We've been going through this system since September, and these are the major problems at hand, but they haven't been the only problems. Even just this past week, my staff replaced 2 coils just because they were not functioning properly, and it was evident that those coils were bad, unrelated to this larger infrastructure issue. We've had other problems come up systemically since September that we've been combing through, adjusting controls, adjusting valve setting points, and really trying to get our hands around it. I haven't had the staffing to tear the entire system apart until we've had such a challenge where it became obvious that was the only course we could take.
Well, I considered it a challenge just before the holidays when we had that snap of cold weather, when there were a couple of wings that were down at that time. So that is a large problem. In my opinion, we should have attacked then rather than try to piecemeal and find the problem now. Just my comment.
I got a question. Our new pumps are, I would hope, are on drives, right? They
Yes, sir.
control their speed.
Yep.
Now, I would have to assume that, like the buildings I work on, those pumps will run faster when it's colder and there's more of a load.
I believe so.
In my experience, that kicks up sediment when that happens. So I understand how this would become more and more of a problem as it got more and more cold, because you're getting faster velocities in that dirty pipe and kicking up sediment that's never been kicked up before. It happens to me every year in some of our buildings. We ended up, after fixing some of the big problems like we're doing now over at Maristar, we ended up putting on some filters. They're mechanical filters. I can give you the information on them. It may be something that after we get most of it kicked, we can put these filters in place.
Yes.
Some are centrifugal. There's others that use a backwash system like a swimming pool. But it may be able to, because you're not going to get it all out until you replace everything, and we can't do that. So I'll bring you the info, and maybe it's
Appreciate
something that we could do to augment everything that you're doing for future benefit.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That was brought up by one of our engineers. Why aren't there filters in place? Recommending different types of filters, and exactly that thought was brought up. If we do it now, they're going to get jammed immediately because there's so
your
much
whole
stuff in the
system
system.
is full of caca.
And again, just to reiterate, last year we had to bypass our water meters because we were putting so much water into this system
know.
that was bleeding like a sieve as we were creating the Haviland hot springs in the back of the building, rather than getting that water where it needed to go. But the issue was we were putting so much new water. And the
Right.
water in that area is
And it's full of
sediments and heavy metals. So the water that was going in was untreated, and we couldn't treat it fast enough, so we had to get it in as quick as
Their
possible.
trucks aren't big enough to put that much chemicals in those buildings.
Exactly. So
Makeup water is coming from the municipal system.
correct, the
Right.
Dutchess County
It is
Water and
now,
Wastewater
but it
Supply.
used to be a well.
I know.
So there's all kinds of hardness
Right.
and chlorine and you name it, it's in there.
And it's been there since the 60s when
Since
that extension was put on.
1936.
Yeah.
57 when the new section.
Yeah.
A section.
So
was
it's
built.
old.
Okay, I guess that, for me, begs the question, that's not the only boiler we replaced in an old building. We replaced the boiler in Hyde Park Elementary, we replaced the boiler in Violet Avenue. So I would like to know what you're doing about those two
Well,
buildings.
this is one of our few hot water systems. Most of our other systems are steam and steam only. The only other building that's completely hot water is Netherwood Elementary, and we did not change the system there this year.
Okay.
So we're not having an issue in the steam areas. Haviland C section has been operating on schedule as it's supposed to. It comes up when it needed to in a timely fashion. It stays warm because it was built like a bunker. Violet Avenue hasn't gotten cold, I don't think, since September when we first started everything up. So in the other buildings, we're really not having those challenges. FDR is a little bit different because we have building envelope concerns on top of some incidental mechanical failures that we've addressed as the years gone on. The areas, when I say building envelope, you're talking about walls, doors, windows. Some areas just kind of leak heat faster than others. And that's been something that we've been compensating for at the high school with our settings and the way that we operate our equipment. But we haven't had any equipment or infrastructure fail as we seem to have at the middle school on any other of our 5 plants.
Okay, thank you.
So have you addressed the flow of the circulators? You drop them down, the speed of the flow?
In Haviland,
Yes.
we actually started to throttle down the supply, the volume of supply, given the reduced capacity, and we're able to get more water through it at certain units individually. So my staff's been making adjustments around these roadblocks that we've been finding while we explore a permanent solution. And that was one of the things that we just started doing today, actually.
Glenn made a great point about the flow and about
Absolutely.
preserving the sediment, and I think we might continue to do that if we don't adjust the flow of that.
And we're trying to restrict it at the source as much as possible. I have to check on how much control I have on the variable frequency drives, as the drives themselves were not part of the capital project. It was just the piping out of the boiler room that was included. So I have to double check how much of that I can change remotely or on site. But we're throttling it down at the valves that feed that side and before it branches off.
Well, that would help because you'll increase the velocity at
Absolutely.
that point.
And that's part of what the engineer coming on Monday is going to look at. We're really going to focus his energies on how does the new stuff, as it pertains to the old stuff, and what can we do better to marry it together. Things like the drives, things like the filters, once corrected, would help us future-proof the project long-term.
One of the places I used to work, Westchester University in PA, we used to have to just bleed systems. I hated doing it, but
I was going to say, I mean,
Well,
it just
when-
makes sense to start flushing
To
stuff.
Gary's point earlier, when he asked us about what we did before the break, all of the empirical evidence we had at that point spoke to an airbound system.
right.
And you folks that have worked in and around these systems, you understand your symptoms are going to be very similar between physical debris blockages and airbound system. So we spent a lot of time, and I can show you work orders and man hours of time put in bleeding out these lines in these systems, and we were getting air out. So we had symptoms of an airbound system. I have recommendations from engineers that it seems that you're airbound, and we're getting air out. So we
doing
kind
the
of
right
thought
things.
we were on the right track until we start tearing these things apart, realizing that it's not just the air, but we're at 40% or less capacity on the diameter of the pipe because of the sediment. So you can imagine now those things put together, I've got half capacity on the pipe and air trapped in the system. Made it very difficult to get things operational. So that's what I was alluding to earlier when I said we had other things come up and we were fixing them. So you get the feeling that you're on track for progress, but we just kept playing whack-a-mole and finding more and more problems pop up as we went. This seems to be the largest one at hand and the one that we could probably correct pretty easily if we strategically plan it properly.
Right.
Okay. Any other
Wait,
questions?
I would just like to get, I mean, I went back through emails and this has certainly been a challenging year and it's, we've had a number of design days in which, we've maxed our systems out, even good, well-operating systems. Can you give a brief overview of a timeline of when, I mean, because, I remember seeing emails and hearing about problems with heat back before the holidays. And, here we are, we're still talking about it. And I'm sure that you're learning more, and in hindsight, if you had the opportunity to do it over again, you might do some things differently.
Probably would have did this first.
Well, but I think what's important is I think there's been a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of perception of what has been done or what hasn't been done, or was anything done. Could you just go back through, and I think we're probably talking, the first real problem seemed to start somewhere in early December, mid-December?
Yeah, I can. Actually, we started up in October. We weren't making much heat, but we were catching up, Mid to late October is when this system came online, and we were looking at probably a 10 to 15 degree differential between your outside air and the building set point. So say it's 60 degrees outside and we want to make it 70 inside, or 55 outside, we want to make it 68, 70 inside. We had a lot of challenges with balancing the system, and that just means making sure that all that water we're bringing in through these new pipes is going in the right places at the right rate and in the right method of distribution, as far as not sending it too much to one place and not enough to the other. We've also had those concerns of air binding, and when you have air in an HVAC system, it takes days and days and weeks to get it all out, and we kept finding it, so we kept going at it. But the difference between now and then is we were elevating the temperature in the building maybe 10 to 15 degrees, maybe 20 degrees at the beginning of December, from the outside air temperature to the desired interior temperature. In the last 3 days, we've been compensating almost 50 degrees of temperature differential. Now, granted, it's still chilly in the building in some areas. I get that. We're only at high 50s, low to mid 60s at the best areas until very recently. But given that it's been 9 degrees outside, we've actually been making a lot more heat,
Right.
And distributing a lot more heat now than in early December because of those minor adjustments, equipment repairs. I've repaired or replaced 40% of the air handlers in the A-wing since December in pieces in terms of valves, coils, and individual components. So we've been able to compensate and make a lot of improvements. However, given this recent Arctic cold snap, it's made what's left over that still needs to be addressed very apparent. But there have been a history of work orders since the beginning of December showing how much effort's gone into correcting it in individual places.
Without going into too much detail, but I guess I need to understand a little better, and maybe it'll help the community, because there's obviously people that are concerned about it. So with the C-section, we know is steam, and it's basically, for the most part, with the exception of like the gym and auditorium, which are hot air systems converted from steam, but that every classroom basically in the C-section is a radiator and a unit ventilator.
Correct.
And it's just your ordinary regular heat.
Right.
Can you describe the A section? So we know that you take steam in the boiler room and run it through a heat exchanger to generate hot water, and then that's just this hot water that's shipped across the parking lot, if you will, underground, over to the A section. Which I'll take a 5-minute or 5-second editorial to point out. This is what happens when you cheap out when you build a building. So for all you folks that were around in 1956 or whatever, when they approved the construction of Haviland Junior High School, they did it as cheap as possible. They said, well, use the boiler plant in the high school, because, of course, the C-section was the high school, and we'll run hot water over there. And it's been a disaster since that building was built. So I will say that. So anyway, when this hot water then goes over and now it distributes, is there a mix and match of systems? Is the entire building hot air from coils, or is there some radiators? What goes on over there? Because I can't remember.
Some small offices or closets may have a single baseboard radiator.
Okay.
By and large, the classrooms and the educational spaces are supplied by air handling units. And the way that works, again, to explain it to those that may be unfamiliar, is your hot water supply comes into a metal coil. That coil is located inside of a duct.
Right.
And I'm being very simplified to transfer the information here. But that hot water heats up the coil. We have a fan that blows air through the coil. You're blowing cold air
side.
from the building, mixing in some fresh air from outside to
Right.
keep the building healthy.
Right.
That blows through the coil. the coil it transfers the heat to the air. The hot air goes into the room to elevate the temperature of the space. The water then exits that coil and goes back to the boiler room to pick up
reheat.
more heat from the heat exchanger.
Right.
So what we're noticing is clogs on both ends of that coil.
Okay.
And when the system runs properly, you're supplying 180-degree water at most, generally, and it should be coming back at about 155, 160 degrees. From one end of the coil to the other, we're seeing 165 at the top and 80 at the bottom. And what that tells us is that you're not getting 80-degree water out of the bottom. You're just not getting that hot water through it
Right.
enough to transfer the appropriate amount of heat. So if the coil's this big, you may only have heat in this piece of it, and it may not be heating the whole thing, so you're only heating that much air, maybe 20% of the amount of air going through it.
Right. So how many now? So every classroom doesn't have its own air handler. In other words, you have a couple of big ones that are
Right, we have
supplying-
12 air handlers that feed the A and B wings of the building.
Okay, all right.
Okay, 2 dedicated units in the tech wing, 2 in the gym, 1 for each cafeteria,
Okay.
and the rest service clusters of classrooms.
Clusters of I gotcha. All right, that's what I wanted to make sure I understood. Okay, good. And I think a lot of people wanted to understand it because, you know, and I think certainly there's a lot we need to do, and we need to, you know, step on it and put all, you know, should have been putting forth full effort. But I understand what's going on here. But I think people also need to understand that the system's a little bit more complicated than the typical heating system we have in the other buildings, which is why we're really, other than a couple of, you know, what are somewhat routine issues happening at the high school and have been quickly repaired, that this is a particularly challenging issue. And I, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses for it, but you know, Perry has said it a number of times, just replacing the boilers and with a, if you'll excuse my language, a crappy distribution system is not going to, you know, this is exactly what's going to happen, you know, that, you know, you're going to have problems like this. So,
Any other comments?
I would think that a boiler replacement project isn't an uncommon project. You know, it seems like a lot of older buildings would have to undergo that, and I would also think that sediment in the distribution system would be a fairly common problem. So my question is, why didn't somebody, either us or the contractor or the professionals that designed this project, anticipate this issue?
Well, obviously, I wasn't here for the design phase. Not that that's a cop-out by any stretch, but I am the new guy. No, I'm kidding. I walked into this project as it was being approved and kind of picked up on the scope as we went along. I can tell you that in my past, boiler replacements are boiler replacements. These guys get very myopic in terms of what they're working on and servicing, just in the experience that I've had in other buildings and other districts in my career. Just the simple fact that your supply pipes were operated as a separate but related project shows that they kind of look at them in pieces on purpose. So not that that's okay. I mean, you kind of say, okay, you did the heart, you did the arteries, what about the veins? It seems logical to us as the end user, but in my past experience, I have noticed that when you tell them it's a boiler replacement, they focus on the boilers. Unless you stretch it all the way out to all the other components. And sometimes they avoid doing that because then the price tag gets huge because now you're replacing the entire system in a building.
That's
And
exactly
that-
what happened. We did talk about it, and the prices made us shrivel.
Right, and then you start looking at, okay, well, how much of this can we get done? And maybe look at doing more of it later on, and let's get the big part of it done. And I'm sure doing that boiler room was astronomical. It was one of the biggest boiler jobs we had, second only to FDR, in terms of these 5 plants that we renovated. So, again, just my professional opinion from where I've come from, that seems to be the most logical course of action. Let's do the big thing first, and then we'll deal with the little stuff later. I don't think anybody was really cognizant of the extent of the blockages in our system because we really had no hot water to that wing. So when what you use to supply all of your other equipment has failed, you can't really tell how much of the other equipment has failed. We fixed the pathways to get there, and then it becomes evident that there's a lot more that needs to be fixed because now we're getting hot water to it and it's still not working. So now what?
So to paraphrase what you just said, we had a problem in our primary supply pipe over to the wing, and now that that's fixed and now that we have a higher efficiency boiler, the issues with the rest of the distribution system have been exposed.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be like having no gas line on your car And you can't tell that the engine doesn't run until you replace the gas line and get fuel to it. Very similar.
Is this problem exacerbated in any way by the fact that we have also started an energy efficiency program this year?
It hasn't. Actually, our energy conservation program has brought to light some of the original challenges that we've discovered in the early months of this process. Part of the conservation process is bringing experts in to help us regulate and modulate how our equipment runs. And we started noticing very early on that it wasn't running as it was intended originally by the design of the equipment in terms of the pneumatic air systems that run our thermostats, in terms of our electronic digital controls. So some of the expert opinions that guided us to where we are right now came directly out of that conservation program. Nothing that we would set in that program would bring the temperatures as low as they've been experienced. So, I do understand the intent of the program is to reduce waste, but keep everybody safe, comfortable, and healthy. And we've experienced temperatures well below the thresholds of even that program. So I would say no, and I would also just want to share that the experts provided by the program have really helped us identify some of our challenges.
Thank you.
You know,
Just to point out, Elliot, from what I'm hearing, I can share with you that the water system in the Haviland area was changed over about 12 years ago. They picked up the water system from the water tank, from the purification system, taking the water out of the river. And we experienced problems only in certain areas within that district. But the cause of it that we finally identified was part of when the water needed to be treated, it was being treated with chlorine.
Okay.
When the chlorine flowed through the pipes that had been there for 40, 50 years, the pipes were being exposed over that entire period of time with a high iron content water.
Mm-hmm.
The iron encrusted the inside layer of the pipes, effectively doing what you're experiencing now, restricting the flow. What happened is when they started pumping chlorine water through it wasn't the pressure that created the problem, it was the chlorine itself. It started dissolving the iron content around the inside of the pipes. Net result is white underwear in, black underwear out. Exactly, and you couldn't predict it. What it turned out to be is every time they flushed the system to try and get rid of it, there were low spots. And all of the crap collected there, I was blessed with having the lowest spot in the block. I could tell everybody else how bad it was just by hanging the wash up on the outside line. So, this system doesn't need heat, it doesn't need this, it doesn't need that. I think in the area, it's probably the same situation with the water that was being used there. I would suspect it also had a high iron content.
Yeah, it was on wells, and
Yeah.
probably did, because it's the same general area, so.
So you may have other problems there besides the sediment may be exasperated by the water and the chlorine content of the water and other
Very
things that are
likely.
really making it terrible.
A lot of our municipal water, what we consider municipal water, is sourced from multiple well sites throughout the area. So you're still pulling the same type of water. And
I think the only reason ours went away was after 10 years of flushing chlorinated water through it, they've run out of sediment to kick out. Not because they did anything exciting about it.
One of the other things that may have aggravated the system is the fact that we've been pumping fresh water into this, what is typically a closed loop system. So oxygen.
Yep.
We've been pumping oxygen into that
Absolutely.
piping for I don't know how many years. Because when you talk about a system that was put in the 50s, yeah, you'd get some corrosion, but you wouldn't get that level of a plugged pipe under normal circumstances.
No.
But the fact that we were just continuing
These
to
huge
throw
leaks.
in, the percentage of fresh water that was going through that every day.
Plus, it was untreated.
Yeah, untreated. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's all untreated. I mean,
All of that
you know,
sediment stays.
right. So it's kind of a perfect storm, if you will, of
Right. The
of
best
all.
place for sediment is where the heat exchange happens. That's where it's
Yep.
going to collect.
Yeah. So, good luck with that.
Thank you, sir.
All right,
That's not what Brad Phillips wants to hear.
And I guess
We'll work on a
Yeah.
system, but we'll pray for you.
I guess that the last question I would have is, how many classrooms do we have at this point do we have any classrooms that can't be used, or is there any spaces that can't be used right now because we can't produce enough
I
heat?
believe we have, and Mr. Shaw has done a great job of relocating people when needed in the rooms. I think we had, and I don't want to speak out of turn, Eric, if you have better numbers.
I could move, last 2 days, 7
7 classrooms.
classrooms to other areas of the building.
Okay.
Okay.
So just to repeat that for purposes of recording and broadcast, 7 classrooms were relocated. Now, again, just in what we've done in the last couple of days, we've seen, I think, a 5-degree difference from yesterday to today, right about 5 degrees. So, again, a lot of what we're doing is investigative. We've only begun to make some of these major repairs, but we have started repairs, and we're at least seeing a noticeable difference already. So I'm hopeful that in the next couple of days, as we lay out the next plan, we'll be able to get these classrooms back in service.
So last couple of days, what was your worst temperature in whatever classroom? What was your worst temperature?
I believe we were about
building.
52, Eric?
The lowest recorded temperature was 52, and also,
And that's in the middle of the school day.
yes, and a lot of the classrooms are being supplemented by space heaters.
Yeah, which is a hazard.
can't move
Right.
every
Yeah.
classroom.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't
Wow.
want to take credit for that with the system. We had
No, yeah.
a lot of classrooms in the mid 50s, low 60s. You know, the federal standard is 65,
it's
and
way
our
inadequate.
standard is minimum of 68.
It's way inadequate.
So
right?
we're looking to get up another 10 degrees from where we've been.
So are these coils replacement, are they common to each other, They're pretty much the same coils?
They're not all the same size. We have 2 that we started to replace last night and today. We've got a 3rd one that we've been intensively cleaning to try to bring back to life. We don't have one in stock.
Yeah, that was my next question, will you be able to clean some of the old ones?
Yeah, we're cleaning the old ones. We're trying to blow out the inside as well as cleaning the air side. We want to make sure there's no debris in it. It's a 2-part system. You have to get air through the coil. You have to get water through the inside of the coil. So my crew's been working late. They've been working nights. I know the administration's been very supportive of giving us the hours we need to get the work done. And the guys that we have are very dedicated. They all live in district. They want to make sure that this gets done sooner than later.
No, I do give credit to you and your crew, believe me, and I know what you're going through, considering the minimal staff that you have and the minimal monies you have to work with, and the times to do it, and we're still trying to teach kids in a class basis.
Yeah, and part of our game plan is, what
But
part of this.
I do think that we should, when we get into this kind of structure, this critical, I don't want to call it critical mass, but, beyond the norm, Band-Aid stuff, that we should go to the specialists as
well,
fast as we can.
And that's really where we came this week. It was, okay,
Let you learn from
we did the best we could with what we had. Now it's all about PEs, HVACs, technicians, specialists. Tear it down, open it up. We need definite answers. This whack-a-mole game that we've been playing has been moderately effective, but it's not solving our problem.
Okay. There's no other questions?
Just a suggestion to Elliot that you not buy any lotto tickets until this is all cleared up.
sir.
Obviously, as bad as things have been, the last thing you needed was Canada to export a Arctic vortex to the United States just to heighten your problems.
Well, I'm glad the dark cloud that followed me to Hyde Park, because now I live in town with the rest of you. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Elliot. Now we will have an enrollment update by Dr. Rychek. You see? Missed my chance 3 times.
Okay, so good evening. We did discuss earlier in the year to give an update on our enrollment and capacity. This is a commitment to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve. I'll start with that and I'll end with that. I do want to thank the facility steering forum that met last night that had got to preview this and had a few comments, so I'll try to incorporate some of their feedback into the presentation as well. Some of these slides are a repeat from June. At the end of June, I gave a status report on what does our enrollment look like. As you can see, continues to decline, seriously decline, not even moderately decline. This year, we're already down 39 students. We've been losing approximately 100 students per year. So the next slide is the most up-to-date live birth count. I said this before, I don't like that term, but that's not my term. That is a term that's been around for a long time. Just to give you the live birth and then kindergarten enrollment 5 years later is a formula. So the 2011 live birth means that we anticipate about 238 students entering in the 2016-17 school year in kindergarten. The 2007 live birth rate was 322, and our actual start enrollment was 258 5 years later. So it is a calculation that is part of what, when we hire a consultant to do the enrollment and capacity study, they do use a calculation to say if you started out with live births in this year, they calculate the number of students you can anticipate. It's averages, but they seem to be more or less accurate, with the exception that in Hyde Park we are losing more than what the calculations would indicate. The question that brought this presentation on this agenda was, how far away are we possibly from closing another elementary school? When do we start making a plan? And a little bit of a concern about, is it time to, should we budget money for next year, as we're building our budget this year, should we budget in to have another study done? And so what I did was I took a look at some of our existing numbers to find out exactly how close are we, and should we budget money for our 14-15 budget to engage in another capacity study, and more importantly, our next, if we get to the point of closing another elementary school, we can't simply close an elementary school. We do need to have a complete and thorough redistricting study. That's a given. We've mishmashed it now with we closed Statsburg. Now we've closed Hyde Park Elementary. If we wind up with 3 elementary schools, not only do we need to look at the enrollment and capacity of the 3 remaining buildings, we will need to redistrict to make sure that we're transporting students to whatever 3 remaining schools make sense. So I took this year's current numbers and I said, what would it look like? And I do have an error on that slide. It should read K2 and then 3.5. It says K3 and 3.5. It is K2 and 3.5. So scenario 1 would be to taking our current numbers. Our schools have classroom capacities. So at Violet Avenue, Ralph R. Smith, full-size classrooms are 20. At North Park Elementary, full-size classrooms we have 21. Those are classrooms that fit the state regulations for square footage. So if we assumed, and make the correction for me, please, if we assumed that we had K3 classes at 25 students per class, K2, and then 3.5 at 26. Actually, correct that. The way I ran the numbers was K3, 25 per class, and then 4 and 5, 26 per class. We would need 19 sections, plus we also have a number of self-contained classes in the district, so we would need 19 for general education classes plus 3. Therefore, if we had class sizes of K through 3, 25, grades 4 and 5 at 26, we'd be short 4 classrooms. So we would not be able to close an elementary school next September. If we wanted to seriously push the envelope and have 28 kids in a class in grades K through 3 and 30 kids in a class grades 4 through 5, we could squeeze. But that is not a perfect science. That means that you'd have to be so exact in that you would have the 28 kids per class, and then in grades 4 and 5 you wouldn't go over 30, and we have contract agreements that if we go over 30 students in a class, we open up another section, it would be so tight that we would have zero wiggle room. But if if up against the wall, if for some reason we had a building implode, what would we do, or could we do something? We needed to look at it. The stress on the system would be huge because some of our full-size classrooms are now used to deliver academic intervention services. We have a computer lab in a full-size classroom. We have a lot of our resource room space and OTPT, some conference space, book rooms. So as with any home, as you have empty spaces, you fill them and it becomes an easier way to operate. That would mean completely vacuum packing everything and having services such as OTPT, that's occupational therapy, physical therapy, maybe some ESL classes in really substandard spaces. So I would not recommend this type of squeeze for any students. We're not bankrupt, and so I would not recommend budgeting for next year to say, we're so close, we're going to do a capacity study. Dan was talking earlier, and he anticipated the same thing that I anticipated. I listened to a good part of the governor's speech. If that comes to fruition and we have pre-K, we will now need pre-K classrooms in our buildings. So just another thing to keep in the mix, that not only are we so tight that, we're not going to do this next September, next year may prove to be a whole different ballgame if we all of a sudden have pre-K in our schools. So I guess the concept is we're close. It's time to start thinking, it's time to start planning, but it's not imminent. It's not next year, and it's not the year after. But if next year is 14-15 and the following year is 15-16 and 15-16, we need to start seriously thinking about, can we do this in 16-17? So the interesting thing about the year 16-17 would be that any of our students who moved in first grade would then be traveling to the middle school. So the good news for not having extra transitions would be that we wouldn't have students who suffered under the close of Hyde Park Elementary now suffer under the closing of and redistricting of the whole district. They would be moved on to the middle school. So it's not planned that way, but it certainly would be a consideration. How many times do you want to bounce kids around? In light of economic times, sometimes the number of times you move students is an absolute necessity, but if it's avoidable or if it just happens to work out that we're not there, that's a good thing too. So monitoring capacity, technically, if by a textbook description, our elementary schools are under capacity, but that's a textbook description. As I said, we utilize all of our rooms. If you go into our schools, we don't have empty classrooms anymore. Prior to closing Hyde Park Elementary, we actually had classrooms that were used for furniture storage. So even though they're technically under capacity, all of our rooms are fully utilized for educational purposes, whether it's occupational therapy, English as a second language, academic intervention services. Every one of our spaces, computer lab, are being used for educational purposes. When they look at the technical capacity for a school district, those are what I would call 1950s descriptions prior to providing pupil services, academic intervention. So when we use that term capacity, we also have to understand that that was at a time when we provided not nearly the amount of services that we provide to children today to succeed. So one of the questions, the reason why we're doing this now in January is because we were in budget season, and the specific question came up and said, should we budget for another study? And my recommendation is don't budget for another study this year. Next year, we should be standing here at the same time having the same conversation. We should also, as we get closer, think about having the a committee look at this again and get some advanced work. If we continue the trend of declining enrollment, we are going to be having this conversation every year, unless something really extraordinary happens. I'm not sure where pre-K will leave us, and if that will happen, certainly there are other things that we could look at as having a centralized pre-K location. We have that option. Aviva would love to have that. So, you know, that would not preclude us from closing an elementary school pre-K if we could centralize that. I need to get an update on the town of Poughkeepsie housing project. Although I heard some incredibly what I call distressing news about the town of Poughkeepsie housing project from Violet Avenue. While the one housing project is expanding, I need to find out if it's the same one that just lost their Section 8 qualification. And over the holiday break, 6 of our Violet Avenue families had to move because they could no longer stay in that housing development because their Section 8 rent was not accepted. So we lost students rather than gaining students. So we do need to monitor what happens with the housing in the city of Poughkeepsie, and it also is important to find out what type of housing. So the housing was expanding and we lost students. The town of Hyde Park Planning Board is supposed to unveil what is happening with the state hospital, the old state hospital center down on Route 9. And I've been told, and I think, Wayne, you've been told too, that they're going to reveal that in January. I have no idea if that's commercial, if it's housing, but that would be something to watch for in January, so we may have some new information. The numbers in our current enrollment and capacity study, the projected numbers are turning out over the last couple of years to be lower than even what was anticipated. So when I look at our enrollment study, and then in the 2 years, we're losing students at a faster rate than even anticipated. This is a slide from June as well. We need to stay ahead of the curve. We want to help do anything we can with rumor control. We need to keep an eye on the economic forecast, the housing markets, the private and parochial enrollment. We were very pleased that both Regina Chaley and St. Peter's were able to stay in business. They had to do it by filling out extensive applications, so we hope they maintain that status. That is part of what the study included, was to forecast what would happen if our parochial schools closed or private schools closed. It has happened in other areas. We've been fortunate it hasn't happened in ours. If you remember, when we did the study, we did determine that even if both our parochial schools closed, we still could have closed Hyde Park Elementary, but it is something to keep in the mix. The other things, we need to keep our values in front of us. And what do we value as a space to educate students? What do we value as an adequate space to provide support services? So we need to keep that at the forefront. And I think that's it. No, I just did that pretty much. So we have to identify what we value, the support services. We went into the first enrollment study saying, don't even talk to us if you're talking about putting art and music on a cart. Again, we're not bankrupt. We believe in libraries in every school. Little known fact, but you only need to have one librarian per district housed at the high school, but we value libraries. We value having some space for our professionals to meet and collaborate and make the teaching and learning decisions that are best for students. So, in closing, from September to June of 2013, we decreased by 117 students, so over 117 students that year. Already from September to December, we're down 39 students. We want to be proactive, we want to be prepared, and we want to be transparent and open about our process. So my recommendation is we don't need to budget money for a professional study for the 14-15. We need to ask ourselves the same question in next year for 15-16.
Any comments from anybody?
Just one question, not question, just a comment. I'm surprised, and I might anticipate that the town might back off of making its plans based on what was carried in the Poughkeepsie Journal, I believe, yesterday, regarding the overall developer of the Hudson River State Hospital property. They have asked and inquired about federal government assistance in cleaning up two of the major portions of land in there, indicating that they don't have the financial wherewithal to remediate
I missed that article, but that's not a surprise.
yeah, they've got all sorts of asbestos
Copper,
issues
lead.
in the building. They've got copper and heavy metal contamination of areas of the land that all need to be cleaned up. And from the implications of the article, that needs to be cleaned up before they can do anything to develop the parcels of land for habitat. You know, we're going to ignore it and bring people in, and that, you know, they're not going to allow that. So and they're saying we don't have the wherewithal to necessarily clean that up. That it needs to be to start development. But that seems to be a recent information that the town may have not had up until now.
Yeah, that's the town of Poughkeepsie, not Hyde Park, actually. The
Town of
state-
Poughkeepsie.
Sorry,
state
yeah,
hospital, yeah. So, but, you know.
But they attend our school.
They
district.
attend our schools,
Yes,
yeah.
you're right, but it's the town of Poughkeepsie, it's not the town of Hyde Park. Yes,
But they-
I know, what I'm saying is
I'm
it's not
saying-
the town of Hyde Park Planning Board. I think that was in the presentation, it's the town of Poughkeepsie that's gonna be dealing with that.
Okay.
But it is our school district, you're absolutely right, it's in the Violet Avenue attendance area, but it just, so everybody's clear on that the state hospital property is in the town of Poughkeepsie. What to Dan's point, just, you know, it's like anything. It's also gonna have to do with the economy. I mean, yeah, they have a big cleanup there. It's pretty nice. The state makes the mess, then they sell the property and say, oh, you wanna do something with it, you gotta clean it up. But anyway, that being said, it's cleanup or not, there's gonna be, there has to be a demand for that housing and whatever they're gonna build there, whether it's commercial or a mix of commercial and residential, and if the demand's not there, it's not gonna happen. There's just an awful lot of stuff that we heard about in Hyde Park and the surrounding areas that, you know, last couple of years, it was imminent. They were gonna be building, and look what was over in 9G by the Moose Club, you know? Big townhouses were gonna go up, and, you know, the economy went south and nothing's developed. So, you know, I think a lot of this is gonna be wait and see probably for the next couple of years.
Anybody else?
Oh, I think Gary had one, and then I wanted to.
Back to the scenarios of 1 and 2, where the concern was obviously the class sizes. Scenario 3, did you ever consider taking the 5th graders to Haviland School? I know Haviland doesn't want to air this. Put the 5th graders in Haviland.
I had that written down. You didn't, I wrote
Yeah.
that down already.
Did you?
Yeah, that actually came up, and a couple of years ago, and that is something that other school districts do, and certainly Haviland has the capacity. So that is something that could be looked at.
I had a couple thoughts, and I'm trying to think about, you know, what is it that we want to see, or what is it that we should be watching, and in my mind, what we need to identify is a threshold. I mean, at what point, and we may be driven there quicker by economics than by capacity, but I think that the more ideal situation is to look at at what point, what is the number of students where we can say, we will need 3 elementary schools? To me, I'd rather look at it that way than to say, how much can we put in 3? Because there's a lot of, when you just start counting classrooms, that's not a very clean picture. It's not a very real picture about how we really use the buildings. And because there's a lot of things that go on in the building that aren't just classes that take space. So it's going to take a little effort, but I think that it may be worth doing that building inventory, and doing it building by building and looking at how are you using the spaces today. And then you have to take a hard look at it and say, okay, if we're going to be driven by some economic decisions here, how all of a sudden can we contract a little bit? Because it's building space, and it's not unique to schools. It's like water. If you create an empty space, it'll fill with something else.
Absolutely.
And they're all great things to do, but I think that it would be worthwhile for us to do a building inventory of the way that we're using the buildings now, and then start looking at what point could we maintain that same operation or similar, and there's going to be some losses in 3 buildings rather than 4.
Yeah, and if you take that right now, as if you walked through our buildings right now and said, we're good right now, we've got the space we need, we have a little bit of wiggle room. The ballpark number is about 200 fewer students. To be able to maintain the level of space that we have right now. So could we 200, I say 200 and not 300, so our largest elementary or our smallest elementary is 340 students. We're already down 40 this year. And if we get up to 100 this year, another 100 next year, we're already at 200. That's why I think we are maybe 3 years away. And when you look at what we're talking about with technology, the concept of walking our students down the hallway to a computer lab to use a computer it's archaic at this point. We're addressing our technology needs. So you have the technology room. Could we free up? Have we moved into the space? My parents had a 5-bedroom house. They only have 1 guest room in the house and no children left. There's a book room. There's this room. Do we have a few other rooms that we could turn back into classrooms and collapse some spaces and provide services in some of the book rooms, or a full-size reading classroom that's pretty much empty most of the day except for a few times, so we have some of that. So we're not squeezed right now. And so the number I have right now is, if we took the 39 that we've lost already this year and 200, there it is.
So we're somewhere around 3875 now, students.
Last 36.
Yeah.
Less?
36.
Yeah, sometimes you see the numbers that include the parochial schools, so it gets a little
okay.
mushy. Because they're counted in the overall population,
Okay.
but not in our.
So 36 is more of an accurate
Yeah.
number? So
I
what
d-
we're saying is that if we get down to 34, 3350, that's when we're at the point where perhaps we can be doing it with 3 buildings rather than 4.
Unless economic climate gets severe, and then you look at the 5th grade and have a 5-8 building.
Well, and there may be other ways of doing it beyond that, too. I mean, you're right.
Right.
There may be,
Right. I think you have to look at different configurations. I could foresee, if you look at the population now, there's class size 50 students different between the high school and the middle school. And
What
there's
do
a
we
50
range- yeah, what's-
student difference between the middle school and the elementary schools. As these move up, you're going to have excess space not only at the middle school, but 2 years later, you're going to have excess space at the high school. So you're going to have to consider perhaps pre-K 4, 5, 7, 8, 12, just to utilize the space, because the space is not going to change. It's the same size. We got to figure out how to best utilize that space.
Yeah, I was looking at the live birth rate. Live birth rate that actually turns to enrollment is about, looks like about an 80%. We had I think you said 322 was the 2007 live birth rate, where we had an enrollment of 258.
Yeah, and
So-
I'm not sure what formula they use, but I know it is a formula, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
sounds
I've-
about right.
Yeah, so if we're looking at a live birth rate of 200, I think it's 238 is the 2011 number. I mean, that brings us down to a 190 if you use the same 80%.
5 years later.
Yeah. You know, it doesn't take too many of those years of enrollment, and it starts growing through,
Yeah.
what was the enrollment this past year? Kindergarten coming in
Oh, I don't know that.
2000. Okay. But, all right, I mean, it's something we definitely want to keep a look at,
Yeah.
and if, so, you've given me the number I'm looking for. If it's 250 students, and then we're at that point, then that's going to come pretty quick, I think.
Very
Unless there's a huge turnaround in the economy, and all of a sudden the housing market
Right.
changes.
Right. That's why I think next year we're going to be having this conversation. We're going to say, do the study.
Any other questions?
Yeah. So, a number of questions, but the one that hasn't been touched on at all. I was not particularly impressed with the last professional study we had on enrollment. I thought there were a lot of holes in it. I thought that, and when it really came down to deciding how we were going to redistribute the students, it didn't seem like we got a lot of value out of the recommendations from the study. So my question is, are we convinced that a professional study is really necessary?
I think when you talk about redistricting, you need the expertise. I'm not sure what the holes in the study. I'm
Yeah, I don't think everybody
not
would
sure
agree
what-
with you.
Yeah,
myself.
because I think it's
That's a, Steve, that's your opinion. I don't think everybody else would have.
Well, I didn't say we as a board
All right.
saw holes in it. I'm saying that I was not satisfied with that study.
And I think
Okay.
it depends on what you ask the study to do. In this case, we asked the study to look at our capacity and our enrollment and determine, not make a decision, but determine how close and could we close an elementary school. But, I'd love to talk to you more about which aspects of the study you feel were flawed, and was it a flaw in the study, or was it a flaw in what we asked the study to do? But I would say, Steve, that if we were just making a decision to close a school, based on numbers, I'm not sure we would need it. When you get into redistricting, I think you need it.
Okay.
I think if you start to, I think redistricting would be the biggest reason. Some of the other things bring out an even larger conversation, and that is when you start to look at things. Tim LeBrand was a big proponent for let's do K2 and 3-5 schools. And if you remember that, basically we came to somewhat of a consensus that although Spack and Kill did it because it made sense for them, we felt that at that time we had enough schools and enough students that we didn't want to have our students go through a transition basically every other year. Come to kindergarten, spend kindergarten and first grade, and then transition again second to third, fifth to sixth. So, but those are philosophical questions that need to be addressed. I've been in districts where they talk about fifth grade going to the middle school. You want to see 1,000 people come out. My kid's sitting on that bus with my fifth grade child sitting on a bus with an eighth grader. Huge. So those are philosophical things we need to discuss, because it's interesting. There are plenty of 5-8 schools in the state and in the nation, but when you tell a community that your fifth graders are going to, it's more painful than closing an elementary school to say the fifth graders are now going to middle school. But it's an option, and it needs to be explored depending on the economic climate. I mean, if we face another catastrophic financial dip next year for whatever reason, we may change our mind and say, you know what, we need to look at this, because if moving fifth grade would mean we could bump up closing an elementary school a year earlier, and we absolutely financially need to do it, we may be having a different conversation.
So that was the next question I was going to ask, is whether you did the calculation of enrollment in the elementary schools without fifth grade. If you did that calculation, could we reduce the number of elementary schools next year? I'm just talking about it as an exercise. I'm not suggesting that we do so in any way, shape, or form, just because we've been through an experience where we made a decision very quickly and it didn't sit well with the community. So I don't think we should consider it.
My answer would be that,
What graders do we have?
I don't know if I have the enrollment
Well,
in front of me, but
Rough numbers, you cut the enrollment by a third,
if
and the potential savings isn't necessarily the same 1 point yada yada $1 million we saved by closing Hyde Park Elementary, because a lot of those teachers would have to transfer to the middle school. So the closing savings we would see in this event would not be the same.
it's similar.
It would be similar.
It's similar because it's
$1 million
the
a year.
librarian, the phys ed teacher, the
Custodian.
principal, the custodian, the food service, the
Utilities.
secretaries, the utilities. And so we basically, I think when we closed Hyde Park Elementary, the number of general classroom teachers that were thrown in the mix of the saving were few. I think it was two or three. But if you're asking me point blank, if we moved fifth grade to Haviland Middle School, could we close an elementary school next year? The same way I think if we packed the kids into 28 and 30 in a class, I'd have to say yes. I mean, I'd have to say I think it's such a viable possibility that we could look at it right now. And maybe we would come to the conclusion after 2 months and say, way too tight, one more year. But I think it's
That seems like a plan that we should have examined in time for budget season next year.
I would caution again that the parameters of that study need to add the plan of pre-K being mandatory and what effect that has on it.
Sure.
And while I'm mentioning that, just another thought, but this had really nothing to do with this conversation, but it is a concern that has been growing in my mind for the last 2 days. If we go to pre-K, what effect does that have on the curriculum for the classes, particularly at the lower levels, K1 and 2? Because now we cannot anticipate a level of knowledge and competence of the kindergartners. But next year, once pre-K is in place, we have a curriculum that's been completed, which should affect the curriculum you start with in first grade or kindergarten, second grade, and how far up the chain does that distribute the work and distribute the load of information. I think that's something, based on my confidence in what the state has done over the last couple of years and with the Common Core and everything else, I think it's something we need to get a handle on and not rely on somebody else to tell us.
Well, and I think the reality is it was a speech, and it was a hopes and aspirations speech, but I don't know if it's really a reality yet.
I'm saying that, but
Even for our area, it may be a reality for New York in the city, but I'm not so sure that's a reality. Much as, you know, you can talk about whether it's a good idea or not. I don't know if that's a reality yet. I just
Well,
think it's
based on the reason it was
yeah.
put in the speech, I think it's a little firmer,
right.
or maybe a little softer, depending on how true we accept the aspirations of the governor
Right.
as making a presidential run.
Yeah.
Because if he promotes the idea but doesn't execute it, it's going to have a negative impact on his presidential
Yeah,
run. So
well-
he may have a lot more motivation depending on where his future lies or where he thinks it lies. And that's it's a tough nut to crack,
Got a
but we have to be
legislature
prepared for
to
it.
get it to go along with him, and he's also got to, you know, recognize that there's limited money to go around in New York State. There's a whole lot of other stuff that's got to get done too. So
You know, the way he's throwing away $2 billion here and $2 billion there, I'm wondering how poor are we really?
right.
All right. Any other comments? I'd like to move on. We could do 6.3, the unified district-wide signage.
Oh, that's Wayne, thank God. No.
That's Wayne. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got to get Wayne on the hot seat
That's
sometime, right?
This is an old project that's finally coming to fruition. It's part of a capital project from a very long time ago. And we've been preoccupied by heat, and Wayne said, "Oh my goodness, I need to give pictures." But these have all been through the facility steering forum. Oh no.
Now you did it.
Okay, Wayne.
Thank you. I would have been remiss if we didn't get the final results of this. And Greer's right. This is a project that was voted on in December of 2007. So it's been several years. There is money there. We spoke about it on several occasions here at the board level. And I think what we decided is that if we were going to utilize these funds, that we should really get a phenomenal unified system of signs for the district. A lot of work has gone into this, a full year. I think because it's so close to the heart of the district and important to make sure this was done right, we took it on ourselves. And thanks to the help of facilities and a sign designer, we were able to come up with a concept that's really going to be something that's going to be special for Hyde Park. And again, this was part of the 2A project. We're almost finished with 3A. So, and then I guess I also want to say that, because, you know, there was some conversation that this project was designed in a very different economic climate. But if we don't use this money, we would lose at that point in time, 62% state aid on this. So it's just made sense to move forward, and that's where we started. And this is not going. All right, so just real quick, the goals of this project included unifying the district's building signs and design and color scheme to assist in the identification of our buildings, participation in the beautification movement in our area, and in the towns we serve. That's where it all stemmed from. Aligning ourselves with the overall design and aesthetic of the communities we serve. And the following attributes were considered: design, shape, color scheme, size of the signs, placement of signs, overall appearance. Everything was thought of during this process. So I just want to show you the signs. So this is what Franklin Delano D. Roosevelt High School looked like. It has a digital display with a very good resolution, so it won't blind the people going by on traffic. So those things were thought about. As you can see, the design on the left-hand side, it does keep with the architectural schematic of Hyde Park with a stone base. That's a dry stack stone base, which was a difficult thing to make sure that we got done just right with the correct stones and all that great
The
stuff.
Wayne worked very closely with the Visual Environment Committee in Hyde Park.
Yeah, as well. And it's on the last slide, we thank them.
Oh, okay.
And the planning board, too. They were just instrumental, and they were 100% behind our idea. And so I'm very happy to see this come to a close. Haviland Middle School also has a digital display. You'll see on the right-hand side. We, again, with the help of the Visual Environment Group, they help us with placement and where it should go, and for traffic purposes, it's just really well put together. Netherwood Elementary, you see that has a sign that's a little bit different. Doesn't have the digital display, but it does have a changer board, which we can put things on there for events that are happening at the school. And this one's North Park, and North Park Elementary. The reason we don't have it up top, we have a smaller sign up top, I believe. Is that correct, Elliot? On the top of North Park, and the main sign, we couldn't put that in the location near the stream. This one is for Ralph R. Smith. This one, it's kind of hard to see, but it also incorporates transportation. And the location of this, you can get into Ralph R. Smith and transportation at that location. It was the best place. We talked with all the people with regard to, can we put these signs here, and all that kind of thing has been incorporated. Violet Avenue Elementary School, and you see that the location of that, and that's also a stone base. Well, the two existing running elementary schools, the Haviland and Violet, both have the stone stack, and so does FDR. And the district office, you'll see that it has a reader board, so we can put board meetings up there, and all of our signs will be the same. It has the seal. I think it's going to be nice. So with that being said, again, I just wanted to thank the town planning board for letting us present to them. They actually helped us. Both Elliot and I were there to present, and they had some good input that we put in last minute. The visual environment committee came over and reviewed this, went on tours with us. They were just a fantastic resource to get this project completed, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Kate from Riverwood Signs, who was just, attention to detail, meeting with us probably 100 times over the last year to make sure that this is a perfect project. So I know that this is on the agenda tonight because it was bid out. It actually came in way under bid, and that's due to some really fantastic work, and with the project team as well. So signs are on the way. Any questions?
I have two, Wayne. The first one is, am I mistaken in looking at the presentation that 3 of the signs are placed on non-school district property?
That's correct.
And we have permission from whoever owns that property? Mm-hmm. And a commitment that we're not going to have to pick them up and move it a year from now?
That's correct.
All right. The second one is on new business on item 10.7. We have the bid award for this capital project. I'm looking at it right now, and I'm confused because it says that the LED board for the Haviland Middle School and the LED board for the FDR school, which looked similar and have the same electronic display, differ in cost by some $30,000.
I was going to ask that too.
We built that specifically that way because we wanted to make sure that we got the best that we possibly could and had the option to go back if it came in over bid. It actually wound up coming way under bid, and we were able to take the differential of the two. It was bid out. The base bid was bid with the electronic display on it, and if we wanted to go up to the higher resolution, we could, depending on how the bid came out.
Yeah, let's go back and talk about that again.
All right. That's
When you look at the base bid and you have the recommended alternates, Dan indicates, and I picked up on this, and I think Gary has too, because we were just talking about it. You get 2 essentially identical signs by what I can see there. Why is the one at Haviland $30,000 more than the one at Roosevelt? Let's ask it that way.
Okay, I'll slow it down and clear it up. We bid it both with and without. The base bid for Haviland did not include a digital display.
Oh, okay.
If the bid came in, the base bid came in very high, and we couldn't afford it to have the digital display there, we would have opted not to take that alternate.
So what's the alternate for
Roosevelt,
FDR
that's
then?
$14,000. Yeah, almost
$14,700.
$15,000.
It's the digital display retina. The amount of what's the word?
Resolution.
High resolution.
The base bid, the FDR digital display in it at a lower resolution.
At a lower resolution.
Oh, okay.
So what you're seeing is the
14,000
net
is-
difference.
is an upgrade?
Okay.
Increasing the resolution on FDR and completely adding the unit at Haviland.
Okay. Well, the difference is when you use the same description and just
Yeah.
change the school name.
Yeah, there's no
And
resolution.
you say, well, why is there a $30,000 difference?
Yeah, they're going to
Okay.
be the same and higher. Yeah.
Okay.
Someone want to recap that for the camera?
What's that now? I'm sorry, you didn't.
What Elliot said
So the Haviland sign did not have the LED unit in it at all, so hence the higher price. The FDR sign had it in as part of the base bid, but the extra $14,000 is for the higher resolution of that LED screen. Did I say that right? Okay, that's it.
Thanks, Kevin.
Wayne, I tried to look at the drawings, but when you start blowing them up enough, you can't really read. What's the materials? What are these signs made of?
They're made of a high quality, I believe it's called AZAC, which is a durable plastic of a great density. We made sure that these were not signs.
Polymer wood, if you will. It's okay. Has anybody offered what the life expectancy of these signs are?
I believe it was pretty long term. I don't know that they, committed to anything, but I would imagine they'll be around for quite a long time based on, it was the highest of quality that we could go with regards to, long lasting.
I think I was just thinking about this now, and again, I'm not. I just want to throw this out there. I think, the LED display on the FDR sign probably makes a great deal of sense. There's a ton of stuff going on there all the time, and also given where the sign is located, it's eye catching, et cetera. But it's certainly not in a residential neighborhood. I have a little concern about, we have a $44,000 alternate to throw the LED display at Haviland, and not to diminish, Haviland's needs, but we have to recognize that it sits across the street from a neighborhood with a bunch of nice little houses there. Do they want to see what effectively might be a
Scrolling
TV screen sitting there flashing all kinds of messages? Or are this thing going to be on a timer where, like, after, I don't know, say 10 o'clock at night, the thing shuts off? Because really, do you need to be seeing, blue, green, all this display flashing all night long, in the front of your house?
We have complete.
I'm not sure they flash.
Well, I just meant if they're changing.
I mean, I just,
I meant if they're
we're
changing.
on camera, yeah.
No, I meant for the actual LED display, because you can put a lot of stuff on there, and I've seen these signs where the colors are changing, not because you're trying to, not the sign, but the LED display. Like, you're putting up this message, and then suddenly now it's that message with a different color, and it's bright and it's eye catching, and it's all this stuff, and I don't think you want that going on in the middle of the night if you live on Haviland Road and sit right across the street from the school. I don't. It's just, that's a thought.
The and this is important to know that the school, and we'll have to work out these details when we get them, have complete control, and I would certainly in that neighborhood would want to see that stop at dusk.
Right.
Or
Maybe mid-evening or something. But at a certain point, you're trying to go to bed and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and that thing's flashing through your front window.
I would agree.
Yeah, that's the thing we got to worry about.
These,
It can be a.
Yeah, it's
Well,
also.
Greer, even though it doesn't flash, if it's a bright enough light, for 10 years I've been dealing with the security light of a house that's around the corner and half a block away from my house. But its positioning is such that the light comes directly through what was my daughter's bedroom, that's now a storage room, one of the 5 bedrooms that I'm no longer using, and into my bedroom. So, it's a great security light, covers a lot of area. Unfortunately, my window was one of the ones I would not like it to cover, and it does.
I just wanted to point out, too, that it was the visual environment group and the sign designer that said to put this sign perpendicular rather than, so if you see the way the road is, it's not going to be, the light's not going to be facing those houses. Rather, it'll be there to, it still will be present, but not as,
Are they double-sided?
yes.
Oh, they are. All of them are?
It's perpendicular to Haviland.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, you had a photo making it look like it was parallel to the road. One of the other ones.
No, that was a different one.
Oh, that.
Yeah, it's a different one. That's probably Valid Avenue, which doesn't have a video
right,
display.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Wayne, thank
Wayne,
you.
what was your original estimated cost for this?
$350,000.
Is this sign set on a foundation?
That's a dry stack stone, similar to what you see around Hyde Park.
It's the concrete he's asking.
But yeah, it looks like there's some concrete
It's
underneath.
at the
I'm
bottom
just-
there.
Gravestone bottom.
We don't want to walk off with the stones.
No, I'm just more concerned about heaving.
Yeah,
I'm all about longevity. How long are these signs? I mean, we got an average of about $27,000 per sign here, for the 7 signs.
Do they have frost line,
Yeah, are they,
frost footings in them, Elliot?
Yeah, there's going to be a foundation. The stone will cover the foundation. There will be some mortar used on the interior to strengthen it, but the exposed sections will give the appearance of dry laid stone.
I mean, the
But
base
they do
itself
go-
I'm talking about.
but do they go to frost?
Frost lines on them.
Oh, yeah, so it's.
Elliot, can you step up to a microphone, please, so we can capture what you say?
Yeah,
For
because that's too
posterity's
much. I don't
sake.
want to have to repeat that.
I forgot what he said already.
I apologize. Yes, when we put the project together, we took the sign design from the sign designer, also gave it to our architectural firm to then put all the mechanicals into it, the frost lining, the sub foundation, the footings. So what you're seeing next to the image is actually a combination of both of those design inputs put together. So a lot of these things have been considered, not just by the sign people, but also the people that build our structures for us.
Now, not all of the signs have this stone base?
No, sir. Only the high school and the 2 historic buildings that are active school buildings right now.
Were you somewhat surprised that we only had one bidder on the,
I was.
Quite. You know, we were expecting a lot more activity. We actually extended the
time?
notification process to allow for more.
I mean, they're good vendors. Lowe's is a good company.
We sent out, we specifically, in the purchasing department, I sent out to about 30, and from local to, long-term. So we did put it out there to quite a good vendor list.
Did you get any feedback as to why others didn't bid?
No,
And they're confident in timeline. You're
Yes,
planning I guess in June would be the,
yeah, I would imagine there's a certain degree of time where it needs to be put together.
Right.
And at the shop or whatever, and then, a certain degree of time. By the time that lead time to get them manufactured, by the time they're done, it'll be spring, and they can be put up. And our emphasis was to have the one at FDR done first for graduation.
And, well, I know the FDR one has power to it. The ones that need power, so it's Haviland, any of them deal?
Most all of them have some sort of illumination.
Okay.
And part of the design was to figure out, as we do the job meetings going forward, is to figure out where they're going to tap power from and how they're going to source that. Whether we're going to run lines from the building or where
That would be my suggestion.
Yeah.
I talked to you about that already, because
Yes.
set a meter, you got to pay the charge for it.
And
Right.
the directional signs, like at North Park,
Right.
would not have illumination, so that wouldn't be an issue.
Right, okay, yep. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the ones Ralph Smith would be a little tough because you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Correct.
Hyde does the, district office, but any of the ones that are adjacent to the buildings and you can tap your own power, you'd be better off than, it's just gonna add cost if you start setting meters all over the place.
Maybe we can offer it as a test case for solar illumination.
Just again.
Yeah, really.
Some company was trying to get into the line, set one for us. A couple of solar gatherers to power a lighting system.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. I'd like to move on.
I still have a question.
Oh, you still have a question? Okay, sorry.
The Violet Avenue sign appears to be parallel to the street. Is the current sign that's there parallel to the street?
The current sign that's there is in the corner
On
of
the
the
corner,
property.
yeah.
And this one would be more centered in front of the flagpole, kind of centered on the main entrance.
To answer your question, it's perpendicular to the street, but parallel to the other street. It's right in the corner.
The existing one is perpendicular
To the
9G.
building.
9G.
Violet Avenue.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So,
Remember where it is.
Parallel with full.
so in addition to replacing the sign, you're planning to relocate the sign at Violet Avenue?
We may not remove that corner sign. I don't think that's part of the program because that sign does provide information from other directions. This sign would be back set on the property, and the reason why we put it here was line of sight. There are 2 rather large trees along the street, kind of framing the building, as well as a wall, the stone wall that comes across the front of it. So when we were figuring out placement, we were kind of on site, trying to see what the best
Yeah,
viewing
go
angle
back
were
farther,
from the
right,
street.
right,
And that's
'cause the
why it's
wall
backed up
blocks
a
it,
little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. If it's going to be that far from the street, then is it going to be useful to have the pick-and-place letters on it?
Yeah, can you see it?
Right. Can you read it? The other question I have is, doesn't that defeat the purpose of trying to achieve uniform signage if you leave the other one up?
Well,
Well, in many cases, we're going to repurpose depending on whatever the principle of the building's desire was. Like at one time, Haviland was going to move their old sign up to somewhere in the building or closer to the building, and the facilities and operations director at the time worked that out. How would we repurpose their old signs? I think the one at Violet Avenue is a very permanent structure, and it does have a use, as Elliot mentioned. And when we went to that building for feedback, this fifth time around, it was mentioned to keep it where it is.
Okay, but the question remains, doesn't it defeat the purpose of the stated goal of this project, which is uniform signage?
I think that this one's centered, with the building, and as you're driving by, you see that the other one's kind of on the corner. It's hard to even recognize that sign is part of, certainly if it doesn't have any purpose anymore, we could take it down. But it does have some purpose for the what is the cross street? Yeah, Fulton Street. Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't have any purpose. I'm saying it doesn't match the design style of the rest of the signs.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to say is that in certain circumstances, like some signs, a teacher might have worked on it with students, or all different scenarios in each building. So we went around to every building to see what what they wanted to do. I think the unified signs is that we're going to have this as the main sign, in front of every building, excluding HP.
Okay, so your response is, and I'm paraphrasing to make sure I understand you, not to do anything else, but your response is that the current leadership at the building want to keep the sign, and that it's still useful.
Right, and there's sentimental value behind some of them, so we didn't want to just take them away. We gave the choice at the building, but we wouldn't make it the center. This will be your spotlight sign at in front of your building.
Okay.
But having said that, and that's fine, because I get that piece. There may be sentimental value or whatever, but we're not. It's not a free for all after this to put up other signs. Right. This is it. You get what you get, and existing can remain, but there are no more additional ones after, unless they're approved and meet whatever standard we want. So.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you, gentlemen. At this point, I'd like to, I moved my thing. I'd like a motion to enter public participation.
Second.
Any discussion? I'd just like to remind people to please keep it to 3 minutes. If you go over, I won't cut you off, but, be as kind to other people that want to speak as possible. All those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. If anybody would like to address the board, please come to the podium. We got any takers?
Doug Eglinton again. I have a question, not rhetorical, a real question, okay? My reading tells me that there are some school districts, not many yet, but around the country, that are starting to discard printed textbooks in favor of electronics. And I've seen one account which says students do better without the printed textbooks in terms of grades. Okay? The other thing I've seen recently, and I'm sorry I didn't clip either of these articles for you. The other thing I've seen recently is that something like 70%, 75% of all the schools, public schools around the country, are so far behind their internet connections. They're so slow in getting connected that it's really useless for them. My question is, where do we stand in these areas, and have we discussed them? And I should know the answer, but I'm sorry I don't.
Okay, well, stick around and you'll get the answer.
And boy, we know who's going to answer that one.
I think we can handle that one, yeah.
Yeah, we got expertise for that
I can handle that one, too. Hi, Bobby Goodman. I have a couple of different pinpoints throughout the thing. I have from November 7th, we were talking about the heat. That was the date that I stood up here and asked about the heat for Haviland, that my son in the 8th grade wing had no heat in his classrooms from November 7th. And when we closed public participation, there was no response, there was no questions. Elliot didn't answer on camera. So I know that date was November 7th. Not only are we talking about classrooms, but the A gym is freezing. The girls' locker room, they're unable to change, so they cannot participate in PE. The science labs are being moved, so that means those classrooms cannot do what they need to be doing. You can't do a science lab in the library. And the hands-on classes, the tech classes, like the wood shop and the computer labs that are down there, are the end of the building that's freezing, and you can't do hands-on stuff when you're relocated to other classrooms. So I do appreciate that all these kids are being put where, but they're not getting what they're supposed to be getting throughout the day. My other point for like the sign thing, I've been sitting on facility steering forum for many years. This is the first time I've seen the price change come up. I've missed one meeting that I know of, so that was a shocker to me to see that coming through too. On the capacity study, we did go over that last night with the facility steering forum, and some of our questions there were with the scenario 2 that we don't want to go to this to put stress of all large class sizes to make 28 per class in K through 3. We have classes K through 3 with 28 right now. So there are a lot of us that do not have a problem being an HPE parent to see redistricting study done. If my child is going to move to a classroom of 20, I'd rather see him be moved a second time than stay in a bubble of 28. So I think that that needs to be looked at more than just as a closing of a school, but as in a redistricting and a equality amongst the district for the 4 schools. The other thing I had was, I know with the temperatures, I have this printed out from New York State Ed, and I just want to read a little bit of it where it says, many schools are contemplating or already have lowered their thermostats for the ensuing fall and winter seasons to reduce energy consumption. The million-dollar question is, how far can a thermostat be lowered and still maintain the 65 degrees when the building's occupied? The minimum temperature required to be maintained in buildings while the building is occupied is 65 and must be there from September 15th to May 31st. I know we're having problems, but I was wondering, with our new energy audit, and I'm okay with us saving money, are we lowering our buildings below 65 at night? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to address the board? Mr. Hughes?
Shirley Turk. Again, the question about the heat. I realize there are issues, but since there is a energy thing in place, is the heat being turned down at certain times and then coming on at certain times? Because a lot of issues are coming from workers in the evening that are working in coats and gloves, which is unacceptable. So I was just wondering, is there a timer? And why is it going off before our employees are even done working?
We don't normally go back and forth, but just a clarification. You're talking about at Haviland or all the buildings?
I've actually had complaints from quite a few schools.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Steve Hughes, district resident. I was just wondering what the disposition of the current sign at DR is. It's my understanding that that was put up with the involvement of Dan Wolver, a beloved technology teacher who passed away several years, and I would hate to see that put in the robo heap. And I still don't understand why the Haviland sign is $44,000, so I don't think you've explained it well enough. And you want to do that before the rumors get out there that you're putting up $40,000 signs at each school. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board? May I have a motion to go out of public participation, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We are now out. You want to take them in order? Steve, you want to handle the first one?
Yeah, I'll talk about the
Okay.
issues that Mr. Eglinton brought up. I've been paying close attention to the fact that a lot of school districts across the nation have been getting rid of printed textbooks and moving to electronic media. I was first made aware of that trend when I went to a technology in schools conference in Phoenix, Arizona, a few years ago. It is a trend, and there are clear indicators and real academic studies that have been conducted talking about proving that there are a lot of direct and indirect improvements that can be made to a school district because of that transition. However, it is often an expensive transition to make, not necessarily long-term, but in the short term. The other thing that goes along with it is that there's usually a culture shift inside the school. And the bottom line is that while I've been strongly in favor of trying to do something like that here for the better part of 3 years, it takes time to plan it, it takes time to implement it, and I would assert that we started down that road last year when we started putting together a plan for a plan. This year we are in the midst of working through the process of upgrading our networks and our facilities in order to meet computerized testing. And that has, to a degree, shifted the focus away from putting together a plan, but has not been forgotten. And over the next few months, I hope that we can start to put together a high-level plan to do precisely that. Now, I don't mean to say that we're going to end up with what they usually refer to as a one-to-one, one computer per student implementation here. I think that part of the work that we need to do is to figure out what's best for Hyde Park in terms of technology. Now, having said that, I've seen compelling data that talks about how a one-to-one can improve the scholastic and academic performance of a district as a whole. It can reduce disciplinary problems. It can improve attendance. It can leap tall buildings and walk on water. The last two, of course, are facetious, but there are a lot of indirect advantages. So, figuring out how to make the transition and how to pay for it in the long term are the two, we'll say 800-pound gorillas in the room. In terms of our current capacity, we currently have a backbone to the internet that's 100 megabit. Most people who have broadband in this area have somewhere between 3 megabit and 20 megabit coming to their homes. Those who are very lucky or feel like spending the money can get 50 megabit. So if you multiply the numbers, 100 megabit for a school district with 3,800 students and another, 600 or 700 employees is a pretty low bandwidth. And something that we've been talking about in the tech subcommittee is increasing that to, I want to say
5 gigabits. 5 gigabits.
Yeah, I was going to say 5 gigabit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't the
Because,
number I was thinking, but
we need the park testing requires you have 1 gigabit per 1,000 students.
okay.
So, but we've designed in more than that, just so that it's that it's going to go up what you need, for each. First it's park, then it's going to be some other testing. So,
So that's a statement about the total bandwidth. The other part of that is the other part of the project that we're implementing this year, and that is a program to vastly increase the number of wireless connections we can have simultaneously in any of our buildings, as well as increasing the number of student devices so that we can test a full grade per building simultaneously. So I would say that we are far from technology poor in the district. I think we're doing okay, but I think that there's a lot of school districts who are much further advanced, further, closer to the ideal.
Steve, a question, when they talk one-to-one devices, is that considered a traveling device? It's the student
Yes.
actually obtains that device at the beginning of the school year and is free to bring it home, or
There's a number of different variations on that definition. So early on, the definition was simply a one-to-one computer to student. Now that computer could have been a fixed terminal.
Yeah, I understand.
It could have been some sort of a cloud-based system where they had a desktop, and how they accessed that virtual desktop was varied by where they were. But most of the time it is a mobile device of some sort, usually some sort of laptop or sub-laptop.
I'm just wondering, how do you deal then with the areas where students at home do not have internet connections?
Well, since you bring it up, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but there's some creative solutions there.
We have talked about it.
Okay.
All right. That was only my question.
One thing that I think is worth noting, and there's definitely a movement going toward electronic devices in place of textbooks. One thing that I was surprised, and we've seen it here, is the cost of an electronic textbook can be as much or more than a hard copy. It makes no sense to me at all.
Nope.
But you're paying for intellectual.
The college one, my daughter's college books, if you get in it, it's actually more.
More
for the
for an
electronic one.
electronic. And to that point, I've read a couple of trade magazines or articles in trade magazines recently where when they build a new high school, they may not put lockers in, because the whole point is that you don't have the books and the papers and everything that go into lockers. So they've made a change. So it's yeah. I mean, I'm just saying that it's.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that's a transient effect we're seeing right now, where the publishers are just trying to protect their revenue stream, and that the business as a whole finds a.
Printing equipment.
Hoping that the business as a whole finds a better business model.
I remember I'd asked this question, a similar question, a while ago, and I do remember one response was that in addition to the actual textbook itself, which you pay for, when you have an electronic textbook, you gain access to a vast, already formed database of information. Like if you're looking at a science textbook, you may also be able to tap into videos of experiments and chemistry experiments and stuff which cannot be provided with the printed material, and they're using that as a justification.
Okay.
Not that I accept it, but.
Anybody else want to handle the?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on, I think, some of the heating issues, and there's certainly, I think that there's no question that there's, if we had it all to do over again, some of the responsiveness to the heating would have been handled differently. I think that it can happen where we can have issues larger than we realize. It's kind of like, it's like an iceberg. You see a little piece of it and you think that's what you're dealing with, and only when you get into it do you find out that you've got a much bigger mass there that you're dealing with. And I think that's probably a lot of the case that we've got here. I do trust that our F&O department is going to stay on top of this. It's certainly, I think it's gained the attention that it needs, that I don't think anybody is pushing anything under the rug, and I'm certain that our building principals are going to demand that their spaces be returned to them as soon as possible. I'm sure, they're very capable of advocating for their students. And I would hope that perhaps maybe we could get an update, as board members. I'd like to see an update, early next week. I think there's a lot of work that's being planned between now and Monday or Tuesday of next week over the weekend. I think perhaps an update would be appropriate.
I think
And-
that update should be shared with the public.
Well,
on
and
the
I'm thinking that
website.
perhaps it'd be put on the website, yeah, that there could be something, some type of an update and ongoing tracking of where we
As
stand
off,
with
right,
it.
as often as something significant of interest
Yep,
changes.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, in either direction.
Yep.
Yeah,
On
in either
Facebook.
direction. And then there was a question about the heat in the building being turned down, and I'm assuming what we're talking about is a question about a night setback.
Setback, yeah.
For staff, and I guess I'm assuming that you're referring to custodial staff that's having to work in the building. It's not at all uncommon that we go, the buildings go to night site setback, whether they're educational buildings or commercial buildings. I think this. It's the way, new buildings, I can tell you, if you've got a new building with a full DDC control, electronic control of all the programming in the building, for it to operate at 68 or 70 degrees during the day and look at a setback as low as even 55 degrees at night
Define
is...
night. Define night.
After the normal operation. In a school building, that could be 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And in an office building, that may be 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
I would point out that besides valued employees that we have in the building that are going to be hindered for doing the jobs, during the winter season, we have active student groups
That's what I'm saying.
participating in that. And I have been at the high school and suffered through 3 weeks of basketball games where by the time the second game ends, I have to stand in place for 5 minutes to return circulation to my legs before I can walk.
As I said, in unoccupied
No, the
situation.
unoccupied wasn't. What I suggest is that the building are so configured that you cannot differentiate significantly fine enough.
That's
from
where I just said,
unoccupied.
in a modern building that has DDC controls where you can control temperature by the room, you can set back, and
Understand,
they do.
but
Yeah,
I'm
I'm not
just
saying
open-
that we have that
That's in a
capability.
modern building
I'm
where,
just supporting the concept that you can't extend that modern building definition to our historic buildings.
right.
No, but I do advocate that you can, I think custodial staff can work in a much cooler building than you may want students who are sitting, because you're working, you're moving around. It doesn't have to be 70 degrees for custodial staff to be working. in
Typical
buildings.
setback for these style buildings and these aged buildings would be 65. I don't think you go too much lower than that.
Do we provide them with hazardous pay as we do this?
Because the other point about it is catch-up time. It's hard to get back to where you were, it's long-term. You have to, especially depending on the temperature outside, you have to stay close to that day set point on unoccupied, depending on the weather outside, to catch up to that point when the kids come in the building.
Are the systems sophisticated enough to identify the outside temperature and
Yes.
determine
Yeah,
how
yeah.
wide the width is?
Yeah,
of the-
recovery time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can tell you that there are school districts in the area that drop their temperatures back to 55 degrees and recover in less than an hour. So if you've got students coming in at 7 o'clock.
They may have steam. There's a difference between steam
Yeah.
and hot water.
Yep.
It recovers a lot faster, so.
Yeah.
I don't know what the current studies are, but when I went to school for this, we were recommended not to set back more than 5 degrees because the cost in recovery was more than you'd save.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the theories have
They're
changed.
very quick recovery systems now.
I'm
Well,
not
especially
talking
with-
about the speed of recovery, I'm talking about the cost of recovery.
Well, with
It's two different issues.
With high-efficiency boilers, though, that's
It
not as
should-
much
well-
an issue as
Yeah.
it used to be.
Well, let's hope
Yeah.
not.
Right, right. But, and just as because I think maybe Bobby mentioned it on one of her points on, the setback is not the issue at Haviland. All the other buildings are set back and are coming back in the morning. We went through everything with the plugging off of the hot water lines. The C-section is recovering very nicely every morning, other than the one time where they left something off and it didn't come on when it was supposed to. But, so just as a point, that's not what the cause is. It's rather, we've got a defective distribution system where we've got, stuff that's not getting through the coils the way it needs to. And FDR's been a couple of what, yeah, what'd you have at FDR? A steam pipe break? Go ahead, yeah, I mean, yeah. So, and they've been essentially resolved by now, right, as far as I know? Yeah. Even as of today.
Just to clarify a couple of points, where we do have a fully operating system, we don't set back below 60 degrees currently. And that's when the building is completely unoccupied at night, overnight. Where the systems are functioning properly, we do recover in 60 to 90 minutes, depending on the building, to our desired temperature of 68. We actually, our lowest set temperature for an occupied space is 68, and that's really for your phys ed spaces and to allow for the increase in temperature when students come into a room and the temperature raises about 3 or 4 degrees, just from natural body heat. So in the buildings where we have had excessively cold temperatures, there are other issues in play affecting the temperature, whether the heat's escaping quickly or we're not making enough heat fast enough. But just to explain how our system is set up, we don't set back anything below 60 degrees currently, and all of our set points are a minimum of 68 during occupied times. So that should answer that one. What was the other
What
question?
were some of the issues at FDR? Because evidently that's what the concern was. So.
FDR, specifically in the pod sections, we do have ongoing building envelope concerns between the breezeways that connect the pods to the main building, as well as the exterior walls therein. There is a historic trend of cold in those corner rooms and adjacent to the breezeways. One of the things that we've recommended to our staff, our night staff that clean those areas, because it gets colder faster, is to go in as a group, clean the area collectively, and then move in towards the middle of the building where there is activity going on, where we can zone the heat to stay on later in the gymnasium and the other active sections when possible. We had a recent flame failure on the boiler room that services the pods themselves. And what that means is the boilers are kicking on and off, but they're not making enough steam pressure to service the equipment in that area. And that was resolved. We also had one of the sensors that controls one of the 4 units in that zone failed just yesterday, and that was a cause for this morning. So there have been a couple of mechanical issues. The good thing is, because it's still under construction, quote unquote, we're able to bring the capital contractor in to help us fix it pretty quickly. They're within the hour generally when we call them.
Good. Okay.
Very good. You want to handle the capacity, 28?
Yeah, speaking to the capacity, we have locations in every one of our schools where our class sizes are somewhat larger at some of the grade levels and some of the sections. So by redistricting right now, we would not be able to, it wouldn't affect, it could alleviate some sections at some grade levels, but it wouldn't change all of them. I also want to reiterate that at our Title I buildings, we do receive extra federal funding for those schools. That does go to reduce the class size specifically. So that is a feature of a federally funded building. But if we were to redistrict right now, we would still have pockets of classes that are 27 and 28 at different grade levels. It wouldn't be equal across the board. If we redistrict right now, we wouldn't have all class sizes of low numbers. We'd still have high numbers in several sections.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, right, the sign question.
Oh, right.
The sign topic has probably been at the facility steering forum as an ongoing topic for over 6 years. Just over this last particular year that we haven't had it there, the visual environment group was in for at least, I'd say, like at least three or four meetings, maybe a year ago, that I know of offhand, and it was a continued conversation with input from them, and then we got examples from around the community. So then there was a further question with regards to with regards to Steve's question, the sign at FDR, they're very aware of the sensitivity of that particular sign, and I know, I don't know if that a formal where that's going to go, or plan has been put into place, but I know that the administrators there are very aware of that. So thanks for bringing that up. And then with regards to pricing, it was, there was a nice budget that was there, and I did mention about state aid if we chose not to abort the sign project. You know, again, I mentioned that it was a much different economy when this was voted on, and we kind of addressed that, you know, several times. But we wanted to make sure. I think it was somebody had mentioned how long will these signs last. We wanted to go with materials that were of long-lasting nature. That, you know, so some of that price belongs to, you know, the how strong those signs will be. You know,
Yeah, Wayne, the question though was understanding why the Haviland sign in the alternate.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then and I just wanted to give you a little history of some of the signs, how they got into the project. This is going way back. For those of you that were around, there were several signs that were stolen. One particularly at North Park that I remember. So we were putting up, you know, like a $5,000, $10,000 sign. We were making repairs in facilities and operations, and that's when the decision came to do that. Maybe I didn't get the Haviland question.
Oliver, because I did hear from Steve, so I'm going to try to re-explain it. So when a member of the public looks at the agenda, you'll notice that there's a base bid for like $195,000, and then there's some alternates. The Haviland alternate is $30,000 more than the FDR alternate, even though they're an identical sign, and that's because the Haviland base sign did not have the LED display at all. FDR always did. FDR's alternate of $14,000 is for a higher resolution screen, whereas Haviland's alternate was, you know, now a sign identical to FDR's, whereas in the base bid, Haviland did not have an LED sign. That's why there was a big discrepancy in the two prices. Did that make sense? There was no LED sign at all in the Haviland base bid. There was for FDR all along. The $14,000 more for FDR was for a higher resolution LED screen in the alternate bid, but Haviland's alternate was so much higher because it didn't have an LED at all and now does. Does that make sense?
So the cost of the signs is not actually listed?
Right, exactly, right. Yeah, these are alternates. The individual signs, if you will, I guess I would have been curious to see this too, but the base bid of 195, is that what?
95,
Yeah, 195,000 was for just all the signs, and then with some alternates, you know, at certain locations, and yep, that's what it was.
When they gave you the base bid, Wayne, did they break it out to the schools, close to the signs? So what would be the price of the high school sign minus the alternate? I'm just wondering if that's going to match up to the high alternate for Haviland.
Yeah, it should be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a differential. It was very, very, very similar. I can look it up. It was a differential between the two. So if you're asking, like, what was the markup or the total cost of the
I'm
sign?
asking if there was a breakdown when they put the bid in for each site, sign at each site, or he just gave you the base bid of
Just give me the base bid,
195?
yeah, 195.
So we're not sure how much the high school sign is actually going to cost. What I was trying to do is compare it with the $30,000 difference here in the two schools.
Right. I know. I do know this, that we had several.
Because they're all the same sign, pretty much the same structure.
Identical. Yeah. I think they're identical, Elliot.
We have a cost, pulling it up right here.
I think Steve was still there. We were going nuts.
Oh, my God.
You know, if it's taking this much to get it, maybe we can get back to them on, I don't want them to start quoting things that aren't right.
Yeah.
I guess his question was, do they have the 195
Just-
broken out by sign?
Not the 195, but the actual.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. Gentlemen, why don't we try and get that information
Yeah, well, I'll
and
get
get back
back
to
to
us? You know, I think I think it's worthwhile knowing, but
Yeah.
let's not.
It is,
Oh.
and just, well, just say real quickly, though, if we're supposed to vote on this tonight, I think maybe we need to put this off until the next meeting so we can get this level of detail. You know, it's a $300,000, well, sorry, $277,000 project. I'd like to know what the stuff costs, you know, and yeah, so.
It's gonna be 300 by the time we.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we'll deal with that when we get to that. Is that any consent agenda? I can't remember.
No, it's
Okay,
separate,
so
so it's just good, it's easy to push aside.
We'll discuss that when we get
Right.
there. All right, next is 8.1, budget discussion. I asked to have this actually put back on. I don't know what we have here on the.
Since it was blank, I thought maybe we
Yeah.
weren't gonna have to talk about anything.
Yeah, the reason is that I'm very concerned with the tax cap, and I believe the tax cap for school districts could be as low as 136. I think I would personally, and I would like to hear what everybody else has to say. I would like our first budget projection to be based on a 1.4 tax cap and to see what effect that has on our budget, and plan on that. And if we get 1.5, which is the other end of what the controller said it would be, then we can move up. But I want to plan for the lowest first. I want to
Worst case
know
scenario,
what's gonna what the effect of a 1.4 tax cap will be on our budget. So that's just my opinion. I don't know.
Well, I think it's more significant because I believe, reading today, the governor's ramped up the pressure on the tax caps by tying the towns and school districts in the state of staying within the tax cap to his proposals of a $2 billion reduction in taxes, particularly property taxes, over the next 4 years. He's saying, but if that doesn't happen, then he's going to be in a position where he can't do that. So the pressure is growing to stay within the tax caps.
Yeah, but what that tax cap is what's important to me, and I think it's going
I
to be low.
thought it was announced. I thought it was.
No, not yet. That for
Not yet, it's-
municipalities, it's 1.66. That's already set.
Okay.
That's what they work on. The range was actually 1.4 to 153 the last time the Denapolis gave a estimate.
Okay, so
I've
what we've
read
seen in
where
the
it could
papers
be
is
possibly 1.36. So I would like to go on a 1.4 and find out, what does that do to us? Does that mean we have
Yeah,
to
I
get
agree
rid of
with
all AP classes, or does it mean, what does it mean?
Just, you know, and again, this will be
It
presented.
would be,
on-
a guess. I understand.
No, not at all. I want to clarify that what we're referring to is the CPI, which isn't the ability, you know, that the CPI isn't the amount that you can bring the budget up. It's
Right.
one piece of the calculation.
I know.
So it could be even lower.
Okay, well, I want to plan for the worst case scenario.
Yeah, don't go with a number necessarily, but rather the worst case scenario.
Yes, all right.
Clear.
You know, recognizing, like you said, there's other things you have to consider, so
Okay.
that it might be
So the
lower.
number we're talking about for a rollover budget would be based on that scenario?
Yeah.
Or whatever, in the past was the first presented budget.
You know, I'm going to present two things: our best, you know, rollover budget number, and what the tax cap best, you know, what we know right now for what the
Okay.
tax cap is, based on what Doug has mentioned.
Okay.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda. May I
So
have
moved.
a motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The motion is passed. That brings us down to special education. 10.1. May I have a motion for 10.1, special education placements, please?
So moved.
Second.
Do I have a discussion?
I have reviewed the package and recommend its adoption. There were 47 IEPs in it, of which 46 came from the CSE, one from the CPSE. And as I normally summarize, within the CSE, there were 5 transfer student programs being analyzed, which reflect new students in the district, and there was 1 internal request for evaluation, and that student was declared to be ineligible in this packet. And again, as we've talked about in the past, these numbers are only the IEPs. We do not get running numbers on how many students with IEPs or with services left the district to see if there's any balancing.
Thank you, Dan. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. May I have a motion for 10.2, termination pursuant to New York State Civil Service Law, Section 73?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. May I have a motion for 10.3, volunteer coaches for winter seasons, sorry?
So moved.
Any discussion?
I'm assuming that the ones that are presented to us are ones that they were able to verify fingerprinting as part of the requirements and the certification of necessary classes to actually function as a coach, even though they're volunteering the time, which is some change we've made recently to the qualifications for those volunteer coaches.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that.
I believe it's true.
It's true? Okay. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. I have a motion for 10.4, recall of non-instructional staff.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Welcome back, Mrs. Sisson. I have to know her. And all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now, a motion for 10.5. This is to close inactive extracurricular clubs at the middle school.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to amend this just to say, add the words after extracurricular clubs at Haviland Middle School, and then, at the end of the resolution, student government club at Haviland Middle School, because it wasn't clear until you dug into the details. So you have this resolution directing, and it's like, well, where? Haviland, FDR, what are you talking about? So if we can just add Haviland, I make a motion to amend to add the words Haviland Middle School after the first sentence before the clubs, and then after student government club.
Second the amendment.
Okay, all those in favor of the
One quick question. The money that's being transferred to the student governments in those two buildings, is that to be set aside for a period of time in case these clubs are recommended to be activated in the next couple of years by the building principals? Because they're presented with a fixed amount of money to support those clubs, and the building principals, I believe, make recommendations as to which clubs for their building are
That's
to
exactly
be
how we set it up
supported.
there. Yeah,
So
because
there may be a generated interest in a ski club or an art club in the future year, and are they to be required to start from scratch, or are they going to have access to the money that's been transferred over a short period of time?
I spoke with Eric, and the audit committee and Linda, and we decided to close it for the auditor's purpose. But if it comes back in a future time, then the student activities fund would have that money set aside and earmarked.
But to be clear, these are student funds, so when it's transferred to the student government, it doesn't go back anywhere without a student government resolution. We
Right.
can't say, move that money back. That's up to the student government to do that. And they usually do. If a club comes back to life, the student government typically gives them seed money until they get going. But it's not our decision. It's up to the student government.
I'm surprised. I mean, the ski club used to be an extremely active at Haviland Middle School. I remember busloads of kids going. I mean, I'm shocked.
We have a subject matter expert
Can we invite
here.
Mr. Phillips to the microphone?
Pleasure. Matt Laff has just stopped those clubs. They were active. They were highly active.
Can you step to the microphone at least?
Sure.
I'm sorry, Doug.
That's right.
That's fine.
My name is Brad Phillips. I teach at Haviland. Actually, I ran the bowling club for probably 8 years.
I remember that.
I stopped it when my daughter started playing basketball, and I couldn't do it anymore. I took 66 kids to the bowling alley for 4 years. And also, I stopped, and they didn't offer it to anybody else, and they just stopped the club. So these were active clubs. They were really good clubs. And Mr. Frazak still wanted the club this year, but Mr. Shaw coming into it, he's a new guy. You know what I mean? So he wasn't sure what to do. So, right?
Feel free to throw him under the bus.
Yeah, the problem is the clubs, and I know the ski club at the high school anyway, those were decisions made because the line for advisors, the advisor line was cut. And when we did our somewhat of a reduction, we were looking at modified sports or advisorships. So we cut back on some of the advisorships, and that was one of the casualties, was that's how that happened. Yeah, but I
It wasn't a lack of kids.
no, and the ski club absolutely.
I remember the bus loads of kids. I mean, there was always at least 2 buses. I remember trying when my daughter was trying to go as like a chaperone, just get a day
Yeah.
of skiing. You couldn't because the buses were so
Even
full.
even
I
this
mean,
year, I got requests for the ski club
Yeah.
again. It was a cut in the advisor stipend. Unfortunately.
But again, if a building principal and a building wants to resurrect a club because they think there's interest, they can kind of come to, the board at budget time and say, this is something we think we want to get back in for next year to get the stipend line in, and then, off to the races again, so.
I mean, to me, skiing is like one of those lifelong sports that people do for a long time.
Do we still do cross-country skiing as a phys ed activity in the buildings? No.
We have a motion on the floor I'd like to get voted on
Yeah,
first.
sure.
All right.
So, we had a
Motion
vote on
for,
the amendment.
voting for amendment.
Right.
All those in favor? Opposed, okay.
Now
Now I'd like a
vote on the
vote on the amended motion. Any discussion on that?
Regretful.
All in favor? Opposed, okay, that's carried. Wonderful.
Just comment, I was at the presentation from the auditors, and it was entirely based on inactivity of the monies in that
Right,
fund.
right. It's a
There
fact,
there was no activity, no deposits, no withdrawals, and now we've clarification, there was no activities, no withdrawal because there was no club, and there was no club because there was no advisor. It had nothing to do with participation the prior year or student interest.
Right. When it sits around, the auditors are always, because we have actually, even though it's not our money, it's student money, we have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that it's handled properly on their behalf, and it's a common audit theme. It comes up almost every year in every school district, that there's some club that goes inactive for like 3 years, and there's $500 sitting in the pot somewhere, and their recommendation is you got to close that, transfer the money to the student government, and just get it off the books. That's all this was. So it doesn't mean the club goes away. It doesn't mean the club couldn't come back next year. So just to be clear on that.
Okay, can I have a motion for 10.6, capital project allowance access, as stated in the agenda item?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now we're to 10.7. Can I have a motion to table this item until the next meeting while we get further information from Wayne? If you could send us for...
Can I just clarify? I just want to make sure I have what you wanted. You wanted me to split out the price of the sign in the base bid for Haviland and FDR?
For all of them, I guess.
That's one of the items. Can we talk about this yet, or we got to bring it up? The other alternates here I'm wondering about too is the stone bases that we have extra here at 3 buildings. Why that wasn't included in the base bid. $3,100 each.
Well, that was actually a mistake by the bidder. And what happened there is it was in the base bid, and that was a stone veneer. If you read if you were to read the bid document, so we had our construction manager negotiate out what the cost of that stone base was, because that was something that the district definitely wanted, was the dry stack and not like a stone veneer. So we negotiated that with that bidder, and that's what.
So the original bid was supposed to be a stone veneer?
That's correct.
And they bidded that, shouldn't we get a credit then?
No, because
If
actually
we accept these other stone bases?
they did give us a credit. They were more than $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I don't see
So
that.
let me get this straight. Do we need an itemized thing? We want to table it until next week? I mean, I'm okay with it the way it is myself.
Well, I think there was a question about what was the base price of the FDR sign versus the base price of the Haviland sign, to make sure that
If you had the
$30,000, right, if you add the alternates, if you add the alternate, but apparently we've got a base bid of $195,000, which doesn't tell you what each sign costs. So you can't say, well, okay, the FDR sign is X plus the alternate should equal what the Haviland alternate is, or, you know, so.
I would ask, does that matter? I mean, you're buying a group of signs, and what the individual cost is, unless you're trying to analyze whether or not each sign is worth that value. I mean, to me, it's a group of signs.
The high school sign has to be more money because they got the LEDs included.
I'm sure it is. I mean, I would expect that it is, but I don't know that
So
detail.
what we're asking is try to compare it with.
Well, I point out that, three of the board members at least questioned the fact that the numbers were different on the alternate bids, and there was no explanation as to why.
Yeah,
Well, we've got that.
And then,
explanation.
and then,
explanation
and then
on that.
look, we got an answer saying the base bid was different, and therefore it's very difficult for us to go. I like the other two board members that questioned it, would like to be able to go through the bids and identify the fact that within a small margin, the Roosevelt and the Haviland signs are being billed and paid for at about the same value because they're the same signs. The other thing I'd point out is the last attachment we got on the administrative information was a memo from the actual sign bidder apologizing for the fact that they missed the stone stack base for the three things, apologizing for that and giving us a cost figure, which is why it wound up in the alternate bid.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled across that this afternoon simply because I flipped 2 pages instead of one. I was ready to stop at that point, and then all of a sudden, I wonder what this is, and read it.
That was actually in our favor.
Yeah, my bigger question is, I mean, are we all comfortable awarding $300,000 worth of work on one bid?
Good point.
I mean, I'm uncomfortable with
That base
it.
is high enough, 195, and then we're adding another 80,000.
I mean, we're talking on an average just under $40,000 a sign. I mean, I don't know. I mean, AZAC is, it's a good weatherproof material, but these are not 50-year signs. These are signs. I'd be interested to have somebody tell me. I think you're probably looking at a sign that, maybe it's a 20-year sign. Maybe.
Well, I mean, this brings up an interesting point. This bid, this signage was approved. It was voted on a board. It was approved as an expense.
So what are we voting on now?
This is a little bit of a late date to say, hey, wait a minute, you're spending too much money, because the board already authorized the money to go out for the bids. So I happen to have voted against that bid because I thought it was a lot of money. However, it was voted on and it was passed. So I don't know what we're discussing here.
So what we're saying is the bids came in at lower than the authorized amount for the signages as the board voted on it prior.
We did very well on the bid.
All right.
And I guess
Doug, I think what we're talking about here isn't so much whether or not we're willing to spend that kind of money.
Okay.
What we're talking about here is whether the materials and the quality of the signs in the bid are worth what's being asked for.
Justify the expense.
Right.
Okay.
And I am also uncomfortable that we only got one bid, and that we don't seem to have anybody telling us with authority how long we can expect these signs to last.
All right, well, let's get that information then. And how much of a will a delay, and how long do you need it? First of all, how long do you need to get the information, and what will the delay and the authorization of the bid mean to the actual work getting done? I'm just curious.
right now, having it slated for this meeting, had it perfectly set to have the FDR sign done in time for graduation. And that was our hope, is to have that. We're having a graduation in a brand new facility. It was nice to have that sign there as well. That was our goal.
Okay, well, a nice thing, but it's not something that's gonna,
Yeah, I mean, you consider, when you looked at the presentation, there's significant design work's already been done. I think they're just waiting to push the button and start making these things. So I don't know if that's that big of a deal if you wait a week or two or whatever until we
Okay.
get better clarification.
all right, well, let me go back to tabling this and ask for further information. If you got it,
Well,
do you have a feel for what they want?
Answer for one of the questions, so I don't know if it'll clear it up. You want to just go to the mic?
It's difficult to determine the unit cost per sign only because the way that they designed it was with standard sizes in mind. So you're dealing with 3 basic designs tweaked per building as far as the verbiage of the lettering, like Netherwood, North Park. So your FDR and Haviland, and I believe Violet Avenue signs have the same pitched roof top piece, and so they're all going to be pressed from the same mold. So essentially, when they priced it out, we're pricing out how many different shape molds do you have to make, and then the cost of materials and so on and so forth. So it's going to be kind of tough to do a unit cost on the sign construction itself. However, the most expensive component, like at the FDR High School, the LED, the base bid amount of just the LED board was $32,100. The upgraded resolution sign is $46,800. So that's why you see a difference at the alternate 10 of $14,700. At Haviland Middle School, it was only supposed to receive the same changeable message board as Violet Avenue would get in the same dimensions. And that changeable message board was priced at $2,700. So the difference in the alternate that you see is the difference between the $2,700 amount being removed and the addition of the $46,800, which gives you the net increase of $44,100.
That makes a great deal of sense. All right, okay.
So that's why, it's tough to say what the entire sign would cost, but I know that the way that it was bid in that 195 base was to say, okay, we're going to make enough of the big tops to do Haviland, FDR, and Violet. We're going to make enough of the medium tops to do North Park, Netherwood, and District Office, and then the smaller signs are the directional signs for Ralph R. Smith and North Park. So those are the 3, base framework sizes that we're working with, and that's how they priced it out based on how many molds they'd have to make. They're all going to get the same size seal, so that's a unit cost of the seals. And as you pull up the design sheets, you see how they're pieced out that way.
I'm confused because I heard that this was being made from AZAC. AZAC is a trade name for a polymer material. But now you're talking about molding, about making a mold, and you wouldn't make a mold for AZAC.
I know that we asked for whether it's AZAC or...
AZAC is a building material. It's what is commonly
lumber?
used. Yeah, like Trex.
Oh, okay.
I have
The trade name.
I don't know specifically if we're using that particular product. I just know when it was explained to us, there were 2 things that were considered. Whether and I apologize if I'm misspeaking. It could be the cast or whatever they use to lay out the shape of the pieces, but it was also the thickness and the durability of those pieces. And I forget the number offhand, and I don't want to misspeak, but it was rated for roadside, street sign durability.
Has anyone seen samples of the material?
Yeah, the builder gave us
of the composite as it's put together, the construction.
I don't have it with me, but the builder
but
did give us a list of like we made this sign.
You're happy with the quality and fit and finish of all the materials?
Actually, our designer Kate from Riverwood went into bat with the vendor and said, you were the only bidder. This was your base bid. However, I'm not satisfied with this rating of quality on the material, and she actually had them upgrade the quality at no cost to the district because she felt that it was integral to the integrity of the sign.
One of the biggest things that we were going for when we were designing the signs is to make sure that they were the best that we possibly get, that will be around the longest and made out of the best material.
And that's my concern as well.
And that's what,
spending $300,000 on signs isn't my biggest concern. Making sure that we get the quality of signs that we are looking for to represent our district is what I'm most concerned with.
I could say with a very, very strong, I spent a long time on this and a lot of meetings that I would vowed to say that these are the best that we could possibly get based on, working with the designer and making sure that her expert opinion. She makes all the signs all throughout Hyde Park, and that's why we hired her to give us that,
Okay,
that
and you've
knowledge
seen the
base.
material?
Absolutely.
Okay.
She actually brought
Okay.
samples, and it was
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, just, I think the issue, where the concern rose from was when you look at the document that was provided to us, the backup material, you got Tetra Tech, and it's basically a matrix, and they fill in some numbers, and it's like, well, okay, so we've seen these numbers displayed like 4 different ways here, the table on the agenda, the memo from you, the memo from Tetra Tech, and it's just the same numbers, but yet what you don't have is, well, what am I getting for this? And I got these nice prints here, but I can't read them because you got them shrunk down on the PowerPoint. So there's probably a lot of detail on their design work, but I can't even see what they're. That's, I think, what we were getting at is we don't know what we're getting for this.
Blind faith.
Right. Right.
That's
yeah.
that's-
I mean, they
that's what
have
I'm-
some nice shop drawings, but I can't read them because they're shrunk down. That's where we're going with this.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I'm open to direction here. Which way you want to go? I've suggested that we could table it if
Well,
that's what you
the
want.
question
if
I
your
had, Elliot
questions are
adequately
answered.
answered.
If you've been
All right,
answered.
and I did, Gary and I were talking about that
that
price
was a big one for
differential,
me.
and he
All right.
walked through it and I think explained it, so it makes sense to me. So that essentially, yes, the 2 signs are about identical in cost now, and now that makes sense. It just wasn't obvious from the way the numbers were laid out.
Elliot?
I just pulled up the plans, and the design plans as we have them in the latest incarnation was spec'd at an HDU, a high-density urethane paneling. So just to clarify what the building material is for the majority of the painted green surfaces on the sign, the side posts and the top peaks are slated in high. It's actually spec'd the type of high-density urethane as well as the metallic paint that's also resistant to chipping and damaging, as well as is spec'd in the design.
Yeah, to give it a little history here too. Signs have been under discussion for the whole 4 solid years that I've been here, and we slowed the process down 2 years ago when the visual environment got involved, and they came to one of our facilities meeting, and they brought in this woman who's an expert in signs, and they gave us so much information about all the science and all the research about the height, the quality of the paint, the makeup of the material for durability. So I think what was missing was maybe filling people in on those details when we slowed the project down. What exactly did the visual environment committee do for us? And we were ready to go 2 years ago. We slowed it down when they got involved because we valued their expertise. Then they brought in the sign expert. And so even beyond my 4 years, this goes back to the 2007 vote. So whether it's another month or not, but it's not for lack of having the highest quality, most durable signs that all the experts in Hyde Park and beyond could provide. But again, I can understand you got to picture, tonight's the night. Tonight's the night where we're voting on it, and you've got, a picture this big, and sometimes when you're so close to something and have been working on it for 4 years, we're at the stage where okay, we'll get this approved, we'll put it on, and you guys need a greater level of detail. So whatever you decide, but.
And ironically, I'm not looking. You wouldn't look for this level of detail on like boiler replacement or all other kinds of stuff. You want to know it's decent and good, but I mean, a lot of this is, you have a number that's not an insignificant number.
No.
I mean, you could buy a really nice house in Hyde Park for that price, and it's going to be on display for the world to see. So you have a lot of questions about it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, also, isn't the building aid pretty high in this too?
Because it was 7 years ago, so it's
Yeah, so-
at 60. Yeah.
So you're getting 60.
So you're okay with the explanation?
okay
You're
with it
okay
at
with the
this point.
explanation? You have still any problems, or?
No.
All right, well, then let's have a motion for 10.7 to bid award for capital project Phase 2A, number 3.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Any more
Yes.
discussion?
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't,
Further
I don't
discussion?
ever want to see
All
a
those in
sign.
favor?
Yes, I have further comment.
Oh, you do have,
One additional piece of information that I was able to find courtesy of Google is that AZEC trim and molding is guaranteed for 25 years,
There you go.
to give us an estimate of
But
longevity.
it's not AZAC.
I thought you thought somebody said AZEC.
No, they-
no, that was,
We fixed it.
he,
I didn't.
It's a urethane
Yeah.
molded product.
yeah, some kind of urethane mold.
Is it an AZEC-like product?
No, no.
I,
All right.
Well,
Have we killed this discussion, or can I have a vote? All those
we
in
still
favor?
don't have any estimate of longevity, expected longevity of the sign then.
I could
Is that true?
be around for quite a while. I'll make sure that
Well-
the highlights I will put in,
Okay.
If
Are-
it doesn't last 25 years, Wayne, we're going to come looking for you.
Wayne has staked his professional reputation
It'll all be
as
long
a
gone.
sign maker.
As a sign?
Yeah.
And it will last
Oh,
quite a while.
I would prefer that he staked his retirement fund on it. Oh.
Remember, the audience has left, but the camera is still on. All those in favor? Opposed?
Unbelievable, huh?
All right, we got there. We got there anyway.
least we got
That's all that
I
counts.
just can't tell you that.
That's all that
happy to-
counts.
Aren't you glad the board got rejuvenated
May I
because
just
of the long
ask,
break?
for a procedural, so if this had already been voted on, why were we voting again?
To award the bid.
We were just
We're-
awarding the
we're
bid. That
award
was
the
the only
bid.
thing we were doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, I know, this is school finance. You should know this stuff. Come on.
I just wanted to hear why we
Oh,
were
okay.
doing it.
I'm sure the scars on your back from
Commentary on
previous
the economy
episodes.
that nobody else bidded, that's just.
That's strange.
Can I have a motion for 10.8, expenditures and funding for emergency project? Everybody understands what that is? That we've explained that good enough? All right?
So moved as described in the agenda.
As described
Second.
in the agenda, thank you. Any discussion?
Yes, and it's very possible that not all of it gets spent, correct? And it's just that this is the maximum amount you're
This is-
authorized to spend.
All
And,
right.
and may I ask, perhaps, as we start getting updates of what's being done?
Yeah, what
if
have we
there's-
been
If there's
spending?
any financial information available at that time, it would be good to include
Yes.
that, so we
Yep,
can.
Right, you know.
Yeah, like a running total of how
right,
much money's
X
left.
number of
Yeah.
$1,000
And
for
you
a
may
new
not have
coil
that.
or whatever.
You may
Yeah.
not
Have
have
that?
that.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And
It looked like it went up opposed.
you're on. Can I have a motion for public participation?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor? At this time, would anybody like to address the board? Oh, okay. We got one, here we go.
Yes, Shirley Turk again. I just wanted to understand, Mr. Sheldon, you said that there is a timer and then it goes off at the end of the day, and you said something around 3 o'clock.
No, I'm not go ahead, I'm sorry. This isn't a dialogue.
Yeah, it's not a dialogue, it just, if that what your question is, he'll answer it when
Okay.
done.
And, well, you said at the end of the day, 3 PM, but yet we have workers there until 11 PM. So I'm just wondering if that timer is it actually going off at 3 PM, or is it going off at the end of the day when our crew is done? And my next question is there a policy that we could find and look at as far as our charter buses that leave our school? Is there a policy as to, I know Mr. Treadwell goes over and checks paperwork and stuff like that, but is there something in writing that says that, you know, this is what we need to do before that bus leaves with our children on it?
Good question. All right, thank you. If
Thank
that's-
you.
Yeah, anybody else? Brad, your shining moment, come on.
For the show?
May I have a motion to close public participation?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We're out of. Now,
Okay.
you want to
My,
specify that
my,
you're talking about Red
my
Hook?
comments were not specific to the school district. My comments were generic to building operations, not specific to the school. I don't know whether we have timers in the school and turn power off. My reaction or my response was that modern buildings are built and developed with the technology in them to be able to turn lights off, turn temperatures down at a prescribed time, and that is a management decision as to what the time was. But I can tell you that in buildings that I've managed, if we had occupants that were typically in an office building, for instance, until 5 p.m., we may have a setback that at 5 o'clock, it goes to whatever that setback temperature was, which could be 10 degrees less than the daytime set point. It doesn't automatically become that temperature. It over time, and it may take 5, 6, 7 hours before it reaches that lower set point. So I can't respond specifically as to whether our buildings do that. I'm just saying generically there are building, that is a standard in the industry to have buildings set back. And in my experiences, they set back when the occupants of the building, not the cleaning staff. This cleaning staff often would work in a setback temperature setting because they're moving around, they're cleaning, they're doing their things. Now, again, that could be a decision, and I would expect that, I would support, if we were looking to make a policy, I would support a policy that would allow us to set the temperature back when, in any area that we could, when the public or our students are no longer occupying the building. So, if it were a gymnasium, I'd want to keep it up to temperature until the end of the basketball game.
But recognizing a packed gymnasium and
you don't have to add a lot of
game,
heat there. It's mostly ventilation at that point.
Right, exactly. But I think just to not to because certainly it was up to Perry to clarify his points. But I think we certainly don't want employees to be overly uncomfortable. But I think it's not realistic to expect to maintain a building at its full temperature from a cost perspective when it's really occupied by very few people. I'm not saying they're not important people. They're very important people, but very few people working in, and if let's just say, I don't know, what's a typical elementary school? Maybe 2 or 3 custodians in it at night, if that, 2. Not practical to keep, North Park, for example, at 68 degrees until 10 o'clock or whenever they depart for the evening. Recognizing that they're not occupying that entire building. They can only, 2 people can only be in a very small area at any given point in time. How much space does one person take? And it's not realistic from a financial perspective to maintain a big building at 68 degrees because there's 2 people in it. So,
If I could chime in
we
here.
also heard that the setback doesn't go back till, it only goes back to, what'd you say, Elliot? 60, okay. And as Perry said, it doesn't happen right away. It takes some time to reach that.
It's gotta reach
Right.
down.
Maybe that's what she needs there.
Yeah. Well, I think, Doug, you're right, the energy contract. But I do know firsthand, Shirley, that we have had a couple of employees that were affected by being in some of our subpar places. Recently, Alice, for example, the painter, was painting in conditions that no, she should not. And as we hear about those, we try to redirect the work, redirect that person. So I think there's a reality that because of the extreme nature of what we've been dealing with and some of our pockets of heat, I think some of our nighttime staff did find themselves in places that once we get this all under control, they should not have to experience. So we do have an energy contract right now that's working on things and has timers, but I am not surprised at all that your phone rang because we did have, I know it was brought to my attention and I tried to redirect the people and the work to say, no, you know what, you can't work. This is too cold. So hopefully we've remedied that with everything that we've talked about with fixing it. I know that.
Appreciate that you considered it an emergency, so.
Yeah, I know that on 2 occasions, I know that Alice was painting in the pods at one point where
it was just unbearable, and some others. So I think, we have a couple of things going on, our energy, and we also had these extraordinary circumstances where I think some of our night staff did fall victims to being in locations that were just too cold.
Right. And compound, just to clarify what I was saying, clearly if it was unacceptable and too cold during the day, it certainly wasn't going to be any better at night. As a matter of fact, it was going to be worse. So, yeah, I wasn't implying that, put on a coat and deal with it. Because you probably, the folks that are working in the buildings that are functioning well, probably aren't walking around with their teeth chattering. They're probably fine because that's what it's always been, and they're functioning fine because that's what happens at night, and the building really doesn't get that cold. But if it's not much above 60 or it's in the 50s during the day, it's probably much worse at night, and clearly that's unacceptable. So
Right. Yeah, that was a good.
Right. That's the way I should have said it. Right.
And then Shirley, I just want to clarify before I follow up. Are you asking if we inspect the charter buses, or if is there a process for inspecting charter buses before they go out?
A process that, we bring in the charter buses to take our kids out.
Mm-hmm.
There was an incident where we just had with one of the charter buses. Is there a policy in place that says that our 19A examiner needs to go over and check that driver? His paperwork is okay?
We do that, there's no
Well,
policy.
I think there's
Yeah.
some state mandate there
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
required.
That's required.
Yeah, I've seen it when dropping my kids off at a field trip. George when
George
he had an
does that.
assistant, they come around, they had like a
Checking
clipboard,
lights
and they're
and-
walking around the
And
entire
they check the
vehicle
bus.
and talking to the
Yeah.
driver.
Yep.
Let me see your paperwork.
Used to see it on those ski trips.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's written, but I can find out. I'll definitely find out if somehow that process is put into writing.
And I don't know that there's a policy or it's in writing in a sense, but I remember conversations back when I first got on the board, which was some 12 years ago, when the ski trips were active, and that was one of the ones, that there was a checklist provided and has been, I understand, in place ever since, that verified the paperwork of the bus, the certification of the driver, and certain other issues. And there was a checklist that goes down, and George or his designated person came and went through that list before the buses were available to leave, either on the ski trips or also the trips to Washington that are done for the social studies groups and stuff like that. So it's been something that the district has been on and ongoing for the last 10 years that I'm aware of.
Well, it's the designated person that I'm wondering about. Does this person have to be the 19A, carry a 19A examiner's license in order to go over
All right.
and
George must.
You can check on that, right?
I'm sure George.
I'll
can.
get back to you.
Yeah. Well, George would have to do that. He'd have to be. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Any board subcommittee reports? It's been a while since I wasn't at the last meeting, so you must have discussed, so the tech things were already discussed. Okay.
No.
They weren't?
We've had a tech meeting since the last public
Since the last
board meeting, right?
public board meeting.
Then we
Trying
have
to remember.
the park,
Presentations?
The,
park test meeting.
okay.
So-
You want-
To summarize it, we talked to a representative of Dell and representatives of Apple. We saw tablet-type devices with or without connective keyboards that were in the price range of $200 to $500. We saw traditional laptop-type devices with Windows installed that are between $500 and $600, and those are prices for purchasing the devices. It does not include warranties or replacements. And we also saw devices that are Chromebooks. So they run on the Chrome operating system, but otherwise it looks like a laptop without an optical drive. And those are $300 purchase price with a year warranty. We really haven't been able to arrive at any conclusions yet because we haven't met to discuss them. But those are the prices and the conversation that we've had so far.
There was one other item you brought up at the end which was a device that wasn't really a computer to work on some kind of cloud connection that we haven't investigated really and had no presentation on, correct?
Yeah, so we were looking at virtual desktops.
That's the word.
Yep, and hardware to support that. Forrest did, in an informal conversation after the meeting, after he'd had a chance to talk to his vendors, looked into that, and because of the cost of the back-end servers and the size of the implementation, it would turn out to be roughly $1,000 a seat.
Okay.
For that kind of implementation.
That one.
Yeah. So I think that concludes the report on the tech subcommittee meeting.
Work on it later. All right.
You broke it.
Yeah, hardware problem here. Any other subcommittees? Not that I know of. Okay, upcoming meetings then. Let me get over here. Okay, on Thursday, January 15th, Ralph R. Smith concert starts at 7 o'clock at the FDR High School. Monday, January 20th, there's no school because it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Wednesday, January 22nd, Budget Input Group meets at 6 o'clock here in the administration office. Thursday, January 23rd is the next Board of Education meeting at 7 o'clock, also here at the administration office. And on Thursday, January 30th, the district leadership team meeting, the DLT, is at 6 o'clock here at the administration office.
We have two subcommittee meetings next week.
Which ones?
Technology on Monday, policy on Tuesday.
Next week, we have a technology meeting on Monday and a policy meeting on Tuesday. For the district clerk. All right. There's no need for an executive session. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Second.
Any discussion? Come on. All in favor? Opposed? Meeting's over.